I've been meaning to type this story up for a while now, but life and work always got in the way. I'm finally sitting down to get all this out. I'm 26 years old. When I was about 10, my family moved out to this quiet little village. It was in the middle of nowhere, mostly old people, lots of woods and fields. The kind of place that you think is boring and peaceful. What I'm gonna tell you didn't happen all at once. It took place over something like 14 or 15 years, and it all revolves around the woods behind my parents' house. The lake behind those woods, that is. It's about a man that we started calling the doctor. He wasn't really a doctor, we all just called him that. That was just the nickname that we gave him. It was December 2002, our first Christmas in the new house. I was 10. The place was big compared to where we used to live. It was around 10 acres of land. Right behind the garden was a stretch of woodland, and beyond that, there was a big lake. My dad and I used to always walk around there, especially through the woods, and sometimes we would go fishing out on the lake. That Christmas break, both my parents somehow had time off at the same time, which actually never happened. So we were doing a lot together as a family. One afternoon, we walked through the woods like normal, and we ended up at the lake, sitting on a bench, just watching the boats and the water. At first everything was good. Then I noticed something in the water. It was long and white, maybe 50 or 60 feet out, just floating there. I stared at it. I tried to figure out what it was, and finally said something to my parents. "What is that?" My dad looked out over the water and shrugged. About an hour later, we started walking back through the woods towards home. At some point, I ran ahead, messing around, throwing bits of bread at ducks and geese along the water's edge. That's when I saw it again. The same white thing, only closer now. Close enough that I could actually make out what it was. It wasn't a bird. It was a sleeve. A white sleeve, floating half submerged in the water, and at the end of it, a swollen bluish hand, a severed arm. I completely lost it. I remember just freezing, then screaming. My parents came running, asking what was wrong. I pointed, gasping and crying, trying to tell them that there was an arm in the water. My dad put his hands on my shoulders and told me to look again. The arm was gone, and there were just ripples on the water. He helped me calm down as best as he could. He told me it was most likely just my imagination, that I had scared myself, and maybe I saw a log or something. I wanted to argue, but I was 10 and already half convinced that I had gone mad. So that was actually it. For a while, that is. A few months later, around March, I was in the woods with my cousin Tom. I was about 13 or 14. Tom was about 8. We were building a den a little way in from the house, using fallen branches and whatever we could find. It was around 4 in the afternoon. The winter sun was getting low, but it wasn't dark yet. At one point, Tom went off to find more sticks while I stayed behind to work on the walls. It wasn't much of a den, maybe 3 feet high. Just enough to feel like a fort if you were a kid. I placed the last branch on the wall and stood back to admire our useless little hut. Tom still wasn't back. I called his name. He answered somewhere off in the trees, but I couldn't see him. I figured he had just wandered a bit far off, so I started looking for more sticks myself in the opposite direction, not thinking too much of it. Maybe around 2 minutes later, I heard this scream. Panic. It was Tom. For a second I froze, not knowing what to do. Then I ran towards his voice. He came crashing through the trees towards me, crying so hard his face was bright red and blotchy. He was gasping for air between sobs. I grabbed his shoulders. "What's wrong?" "A man tried to take me. He told me to go with him." That's when we ran straight back to the house. My parents did the same thing as always. Hot chocolate, blankets, trying to help him calm down. Once he could talk again, he told him what happened. He said a doctor had approached them in the woods, an old man in a long white coat. The man told Tom to come with him because he wanted to make him better. That was enough for my dad. He ended up calling the police. They arrived a couple of hours later. They were asking questions, took a statement, then they went searching in the woods. Of course, they didn't find anything. It had been hours by then, so whoever or whatever was out there was long gone. After that, things did change a bit. Tom didn't come over for a while, and when he did, we were not allowed in the woods on our own anymore. This happened in May of 2005. I remember some time had passed. My little brother Dylan was 6. By then, going for walks in the woods with Dylan had become our thing. He loved birds, so he would bring his little binoculars and just stomp around the leaves, as I pretended to know what we were looking at. One warm day at the end of May, our cousin Tom was visiting again. We all headed into the woods. At some point, Tom and Dylan went running ahead, laughing and messing around. I ended up staying a bit behind. I think I was playing the snake game on the Nokia phone. I sat down on a tree stump and just kept playing, listening to the voices of the boys bouncing between the trees. A few minutes later, Dylan came running back. "Can we climb trees with Tom?" he asked, all excited. My parents had always been strict about tree climbing. It was always a firm no, but they weren't there, and so I was like, what's the worst that can happen? "Yeah, go for it," I said. They tore off again, deeper into the woods. About 30 minutes passed. I could still hear them for a while, shouting and laughing, and then, slowly, the noise kind of faded. Eventually I realized I couldn't hear them at all. I sighed, stood up, and called out. I wasn't panicking. I was just annoyed, convinced they were up to something. I pushed through the trees until I finally saw them. Both of them were standing completely still by a tree, about 30 feet away. They were just staring straight up into the branches. "Hey, what are y'all doing?" I called. No answer. I walked closer. "Seriously, what are y'all doing?" Still nothing. I followed their gaze up into the tree. There was nothing there, just branches and leaves. "What are y'all looking at?" That's when they both turned to look at me at the same time. Their faces were pale. Dylan's eyes were wide. Tom's mouth was slightly open. "What is he doing?" Dylan whispered. I frowned. "Who?" "The man in the tree," Tom said. "Why is he in the tree?" That's when my whole body went cold. "There's no one in the tree," I snapped, suddenly angry because I was scared. "There's no one in the woods. Come on, we're going home. It's not funny." They didn't argue. They just followed me back. Both of them were quiet. At the house, they sat on the sofa looking like they had been sick. Tom's mom, Jenny, was asking what happened. I just said nothing. They're just playing around some stupid game. And then went upstairs, but I could still hear the murmur of their voices from the top of the stairs. Curiosity got the better of me. I creeped down far enough to listen. Both of them were telling the adults the same thing, that there was an old man up in the tree, wearing a long white coat, that he had been watching them, that when they told me to look, I somehow couldn't see him. My dad then asked what kind of white coat, like a long doctor's coat. Later that night, after Tom had gone home and Dylan was in bed, I came back downstairs. My parents were still talking about it. We all eventually decided that they must have seen something on TV or scared each other with some story. I tried to let it go, but around 10:30 that night, I was on MSN Messenger talking with a friend, and he asked me if I wanted to meet up at the lake the next day. That word, lake, hit me like a brick. I saw the water again in my head. I saw that white sleeve, that swollen hand, like an arm in a white coat, floating just offshore. Suddenly, all of it felt connected in a way I really didn't like. I pushed the thought away, and I tried going to sleep. August 2005. Summer rolled in. One Saturday, we had a big family barbecue for my uncle's birthday. There were relatives everywhere, kids tearing around the garden, food, music, the usual. By around 11 at night, most people had left. Tom's family was still there, and so was Darren's family. Darren was another cousin. We barely saw him unless it was a special day. He was around 17 or 18. He was older than me, and I thought he was cool because he smoked and acted like he didn't care about anything. Me, Dylan, Tom, Darren, and Darren's 10-year-old brother Paul, we all ended up sitting on the bench at the edge of the woods, a little away from the house lights. Darren lit a cigarette, and he tried to offer it around, but none of us wanted one. We were talking, just being kids, or teenagers, when Darren's dad shouted that they would be leaving in about 10 minutes. We stayed where we were until he shouted again, and that second one got us moving. We stood up to go back to the house when we heard a noise from the woods, a branch snapping and some leaves. We all froze for a second, then shrugged it off. Maybe a fox or a bird. We had taken maybe 20 or 30 feet towards the house when we heard it, like something big pushing through dry leaves. Only there wasn't that many leaves on the ground, not enough to make that much noise. We turned and stared into the tree line. The sun had been down a while, but the horizon was still faintly lit, so we could still see the silhouettes of trunks and branches. At first, there was nothing, just shadows. Then, I saw it. A shape, not huge, not tiny. A figure that stepped slightly out from behind a tree and stopped. Just a man-shaped shadow at first. Tall, still. "Who the fuck are you?" Darren said. No reply. We just stood there, watching it watch us. Darren, trying to look hard. He said something about going to check it out. I was like, "What is wrong with you?" But the others drifted a bit closer to him, like they didn't want to be left standing alone. We walked back towards the bench in the woods until we were close enough to pick out details. My stomach dropped. The person by the tree was wearing a long white coat. My little brother and Tom just froze. Paul did too. Darren and I went a few more steps ahead. Darren shouted again, but I could barely hear him. I couldn't take my eyes off the man. His coat reached past his knees. I could see a faint reflection in what looked like glasses. He just stood there, half in shadow, like he was studying us. We should go back to the house," I said quietly. "Don't be a wuss," Darren said. Then louder, "Hey, you need to piss off before I smash your face in." It was laughable. Darren was really thin, but his voice echoed weird between the trees. This man then took 2 steps. The younger boy started to cry. Dylan tugged my arm. "It's him," he said. "It's the man from the woods. The man from the tree." Tom was saying the same thing. That snapped me out of it. "I'm taking them back," I told Darren. "You do whatever you want." He opened his mouth to call me something, then turned back to shout at the figure again. But the man was gone. Just an empty space between the trees. We ran to the adults and told them everything. My dad, my uncle, and my older cousin Jack grabbed some flashlights and went to search the woods. They were gone maybe 15 minutes, but they found nothing. Again, eventually everyone went home and we went to bed. But from that night on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there had its eyes on us. Late 2005. A few months later, late November, or maybe around December. I got home late from school. I was helping the drama club run sound for some school performance, and I didn't get back until around 7. When I turned onto our driveway, there was a police car parked outside. My stomach knotted. I went in. 2 officers were sitting at the dining table with my dad. He looked shaken. When he saw me, he came straight over and told me to go up to my room for a bit. I checked Dylan's room on the way up. His light was on. The bed was empty. Same with my parents' room. The lights were on. No one there. Everything felt wrong. I sat on my bed, trying not to imagine the worst. 25 minutes later, my dad came up. He told me that Dylan had been rushed to the hospital and that Mom had gone with him in the ambulance. I started asking a million questions at once. He said that Mom had gone out into the garden to put some stuff in the bin, and he found Dylan lying unconscious next to his swing set. No marks on him, no blood. He was just out cold. Because the incident involved a child, the police had to come and take a report. We're going to the hospital, my dad said. Get changed. We drove over in near silence. At the hospital, Dylan looked wrong. His skin had a blue-gray tint. His fingernails were light purple. He didn't respond when we spoke to him. The machines were beeping quietly around his bed. The doctor said that they needed to run scans to rule out things like a stroke or a brain bleed. The words didn't even sound real coming out of his mouth. Hours went by. The scans came back clear. No brain bleed, no obvious trauma, nothing they could see. So why wouldn't he wake up? They started talking about a possible severe allergic reaction. They ran more testing, but they still found nothing. Around 2 in the morning, my dad decided to take me home so I could get a bit of sleep while my mom stayed by his side. At around 5:30, the phone rang. We needed to go back. Dylan might not have much longer, Mom said through tears. It's getting worse, my mom said through the phone. We drove back in that horrible numb state where you're not really thinking anything. In the room, his monitor showed his heart rate, blood pressure. Everything was dropping. His skin looked washed out, waxy-like. And then slowly, he started to cough. At first it was just a little movement out of his chest, then a mumble, a twitch of his hand. The nurse rushed to get the doctor. Everyone was staring, afraid to get their hopes up. As his eyes fluttered open, he then started to cry. The doctor himself looked shocked. Over the next hour or so, Dylan calmed down. His color slowly returned to normal. He was weak, tired, but awake. After 2 days, they let him come home, still not really sure what happened. The next morning, he finally felt hungry. Mom sat him down at the table, made him something soft to eat, and started asking about what he remembers. At first he wouldn't talk. He just stared at the floor, shoulders shaking. I knelt next to him, tried to reassure him. I told him everything was alright, that we just wanted to know what happened. Eventually, he stopped crying, wiped his eyes, and whispered, "The man from the woods. He was here." Mom's face turned white. "What do you mean?" I asked. "The man we saw in the woods," Dylan said. "He came to take me to his house. He said he needed to help me." Mom stood up and ran to the phone to call my dad at work. I told Dylan it wasn't funny, that he needed to stop making up stories. He insisted he wasn't. He looked terrified. I then asked him to draw the man. I then gave him some paper and crayons, and he drew a tall, dead man with glasses and a long white coat. It was unmistakable. It was the same figure that we had seen by the trees, the same shape the younger boys had described. When Dad got home, we told him, and he called the police again. For the next 6 months or so, the whole area was on high alert. People kept an eye out for any strange older man in a white coat. Eventually, nothing happened. No one was ever caught, and people began to say that Dylan was just making it up, that he had an overactive imagination, that this quote-unquote allergic reaction had scared them into making up a story to explain it. We didn't talk much after that, but it never really went away. April 2008. That spring, my parents and Dylan went away for the night to visit family, leaving me home alone. I invited some friends over, Jay, Kirsty, Natalie, and Andrew. We ordered pizza, played games, drank some beer, and just normal teenager stuff. Around 10:30 p.m., full of scary movies and alcohol, we decided it would be a good idea to go for a walk in the woods. We had just seen Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street, and we were in the perfect mood for scaring ourselves. As we walked, I told him about Dylan's incident, the coma, the man in the coat, and all the weirdness over the years. They all laughed it off as some dramatic kid story. Andrew said that Dylan had most likely slipped into a coma, got terrified by the experience, and latched onto the man in the woods story as a way to make sense of it. We found a spot and lit a small fire, sitting around it swapping ghost stories. At one point, Jay went off a little way into the trees to take a piss. About a minute or two later, he then shouted, "Hey, stop fucking around." We laughed, called back to ask what he meant, and he came stomping back to the fire. Annoyed, who was tapping me on the head with a twig, he demanded. We looked at each other. No one had moved. "It wasn't us," I said. He didn't believe us at first, but we hadn't left the circle of light. There was no way any of us had gotten behind him without him noticing. About half an hour passed, and Jay kept glancing into the trees like he was hearing things. He said he had kept seeing something moving between the trunks, just out of the firelight. We all shrugged it off as the combination of beer and scary stories, but after a while, the girl started to look uneasy and asked if we could just head back. The mood had shifted, and the fun buzz had been drained away. I suggested that we cut across and head towards the lake. It was maybe a 15 or 20-minute walk through the woods. Everyone agreed. As we were walking along a narrow path, Kirsty suddenly screamed. "What is that?" she shouted, pointing between the trees. We all turned to look. My heart dropped. About 30 feet away, half hidden by trunks and branches, was standing a tall figure in a white coat. Before I could stop myself, the words just came out of my mouth. "It's the fucking doctor." Everyone looked at me like I was insane, but their faces changed when they really focused on the figure. This time, he wasn't just standing there watching. He started walking towards us. We spun around and headed back the way that we had came, but then the man, he let out this high-pitched, shrieking sound, like a wounded animal, and then he broke into a run. Fuck that, so did we. Branches whipped at our faces as we ran back through the dark. We then bursted out of the tree line near the bench by the garden and turned back to see where he was. Nothing. Nobody. We started to relax for half a second, and then he appeared again, suddenly stepping from behind another tree, running towards us again. We ran straight into the house, slammed the door and locked it. The girls were sobbing and huddled together on the sofa. Jay just stood by the stairs, pale and shaking. Andrew and I went to the front window and peeked out. The man was running up the driveway. He reached the front door and started hammering on it. The blow shook the frame, the sound of his fist or feet. I honestly didn't know, but he was hitting it so hard it sounded like the wood was gonna break. "Fuck off," I yelled through the door. "We called the police," but he didn't stop. I peeked out a side window. He was kicking the door now. Up close, he looked even worse. His arms and legs seemed too long for his body, like they had been stretched. His hair was shoulder length, greasy, hanging in gray strands that looked almost like worms. His eyes were sunken. For a second, he stopped and stared straight up at me in the window. I locked eyes with him and just froze. It felt like I was looking at something that was trying very hard to act like human and not quite getting it right. Then he turned back to the door, gave it a few final kicks, and suddenly spun around and ran back down the driveway into the woods. The police arrived not long after. We told them everything: the man, the chase, the banging on the door. They saw that we were underage and drinking, and so they just took our remaining alcohol and gave us a lesson. They didn't find anyone in the area. The next day they came back and talked to my parents. I got grounded, and once again, the adults basically said it was an overblown story, fueled by alcohol and scary movies. We just agreed not to talk about it much anymore. I didn't go back into the woods for a long time. June, by 2010, I was 19, living at home, working part-time and saving money. My girlfriend Emily spent most of her time at our house, and my parents were having a small extension built out back, kind of like a summer house. One Friday, Emily was heading to work, and I had the day off. The builders were out back, working away. I decided to get some serious gaming on. As I was about to head back inside, one of the builders called me over. "Do you know what time your dad's gonna be back?" he asked. I said I didn't. He looked a bit nervous. "Let him know that I need to talk to him about something when he gets in." I said sure, and went back to my game. I figured it was something about the build. After a couple of hours, I got bored and decided to go for a walk. It was a nice day, and I found myself drifting, almost without thinking, into the woods. I went around, and I found the old fire spot where we had sat years ago. I walked to the tree where we first saw the doctor standing that night, but it was just a tree. There was nothing. I spent around 15 minutes or so just wandering around and then headed back. As soon as I came back around the house, the same builder waved me over again. "We saw someone in the house," he said. He was tall and old. We shouted to ask who he was since we had never seen him around before. We thought maybe it was your granddad or something. My stomach went ice cold. What did he look like? An older guy, tall, glasses, long white coat. He was standing in the upstairs window on the left. The window on the left upstairs was my brother's room. I went straight inside, heart pounding, and ran up to Dylan's room. Nothing. Everything was exactly how it should be. I tried to tell myself that maybe the builders had heard some story about the so-called doctor and were just having a laugh. I shrugged it off, but that picture, tall old man, white coat, standing in my little brother's window, it stayed in my head. The last time I saw him in person was in May of 2013. I was 22, getting ready to move out for university. Jack and Jay came over one evening, and we decided to go into the woods for old time's sake, have a barbecue, drink, and joke about the doctor. We sat up not far from the old spots, talking and teasing Jay about that night that he got his head tapped with a twig. I even started poking his head with a stick again for a laugh, and he told me to piss off. Hours passed, and the conversation turned to the doctor. We were older now. We talked about him like he was one of those childhood boogeymans that we all had hyped up. Jack had his camera with him. It was around 7:20 p.m. Light was fading. We started half seriously, half joking, treating it like a paranormal hunt. "Doctor, come on," we called into the trees. "Show your fucking self." And Jack wandered around taking photos of random trees and patches of undergrowth, hoping to catch something in a shot. After a while, he stopped and frowned at the camera screen. "That's weird." He showed us 3 shots of the same tree. In 2 of them, there was this faint, greenish mist hanging in front of it. In the third, It was gone. We thought it was most likely a smudge or a breath fog or something, but it still gave us chills. We carried on, mainly because we wanted to see if anything else would show up, and also because every time we thought about stopping, the silence of the woods felt heavier. Then we heard a noise. It sounded like a dog throwing up somewhere in the trees, wet and harsh. We laughed it off at first, but it repeated, moving around us, always just out of sight. Jay started shouting into the woods. He started threatening the old man, saying that he had seen on some TV show that provoking spirits would get them to show up. 15 minutes went by. We heard soft footsteps on dry leaves, but when we shined our flashlights in the direction of the sounds, we didn't see anything. Jack just kept snapping pictures. Then he called us over again. He had taken 5 more photos, and each one of them looked stranger. One looked like it had been shot through a dirty window. Another one was almost completely obscured by a thick white mist. The last 3 showed the trunk of a tree with what looked like a hand reaching over it. Not a clear one, more like a pale blur shaped like fingers grasping the bark. We were all nervous by now. We decided that whatever was happening seemed centered around that area. We stood there and called out again. That's when we heard it. That same horrible choking, dog vomit noise, but this time closer and behind us. We spun around. There, by another tree further back, was a long, dark shadow roughly man-shaped. Jack tried to zoom in and get a clear shot, but the light was too low. His camera struggled to focus. We walked closer, the smell hitting us before the sight did. A stench like wet soil mixed with human waste, like a sewage plant had been dragged through the mud. As we got closer still, we saw it. The white coat. Impossibly tall, thin, motionless at first, just standing there watching us. We were maybe 10 feet away, and we could hear his breathing. A deep growl of a breath that sounded like his lungs were full of stones. His eyes locked on mine. I'm about 6'3", but at this point I had to look up to meet his gaze. His eyes were sunken, ringed in shadow, the same that I had seen at the front door years earlier. "Who the fuck are you?" I said. "What do you want?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, chest heaving, breathing that same awful sound. Jack lifted his camera and took a photo. It was like lighting a fuse. The doctor exploded into motion. He started growling and shrieking, waving his arms like a madman. The movement was wrong, too fast, too jerky, looking like his joints were not put together right. We backed up, shouting at him to stay where he was. He started swaying from side to side. His body started bending at angles that didn't make sense, like if gravity didn't apply to him the way it should. I had never seen a human being move like that. Jack, for some insane reason, took another photo. The doctor let out a scream that I can still hear if I think about it too long. It sounded with anger. I yelled at Jack to stop, that I didn't want to get murdered by some 7-foot freak in a lab coat. Then, all at once, he went still, perfectly still, and the woods felt completely silent. We waited about 30 seconds, a minute. I tried calling out again. Jack went to take another picture, but his camera wouldn't work. Dead. No power. Even though he said the battery was fully charged. I pulled my phone out. I turned on the light and snapped a few pictures of the man where he stood. When we looked at them, they were all black. Or nothing. I tried again. As soon as I raised my phone, the doctor suddenly turned and ran. We shouted and ran after him, but he was fucking fast. He moved through the trees in a way that didn't even look real, like the world was on slow motion and he wasn't. We couldn't keep up. He stopped again, further ahead, in that same perfect statue pose, and he half turned to stare at us. Part of me wanted to get close enough to really see him, to prove to myself that he was just a man and not whatever my brain was telling me he was. He let out another screech, and then started climbing a tree, but not like a normal person, more like something just going up, more like an animal, grabbing the trunk and branches with those two long limbs. We ran closer, shining our light up the trunk. By the time that we got to it, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, nothing. We waited there at the base of the tree for 20 minutes, calling out, listening. He was gone. Back at the house, we stayed up all night, going through the photos on Jack's camera. They were all the same, the weird half-formed shapes, the hand on the tree, but the ones that I took on my phone, useless. Soon after that, I moved out for university. I ended up living about 10 or 12 miles from my parents' place, but I have never set foot in those woods again. I do go visit home, but I'll stand in the garden and look at the trees and feel that same cold weight in my stomach, but I don't go into the woods anymore. My family still lives there. They haven't seen him since, but our dog refuses to go anywhere near the woods at night. She'll go out to use the bathroom, but she'll stay close to the house, staring into the dark line of trees. If you put your hand in front of her eyes, she'll move her head around your hand, just so that she can keep watching the woods. It's almost like she's waiting for something to move. The following year, I decided I couldn't just leave it as a bunch of half-remember encounters. I wanted to know if there was anything in the town's history that possibly lined up with everything that I had seen. So I went back for a weekend, and I spent a couple of hours just wandering around, shops, cafes, anywhere people might be willing to say something. Some of the locals knew my parents, so they were happy enough to talk. Here's what I got. Margaret Wesley, 72. She lived in town since she was around 10. She said she believed in the supernatural because she had seen a ghost at some point, but she had never heard of any doctor dying in the area. She did, however, vaguely remember a man drowning in the lake back in the 1970s. Some people said it was suicide. Others said that he was killed. She thought he might have been foreign, maybe German. She couldn't remember his name though. Ross Walker, 52. He was a bit less helpful. His dad, who had died in 2015 at the age of 82, he had lived in the town for decades and never mentioned anything weird about the lake. Ross thought that his own house was haunted by an old man named Greg, Old Greg, as he put it, but he seemed a bit drunk and not exactly reliable. A woman named Mary, in her late 60s, she told me her parents had owned a farm near my parents' place. She said her dogs would never go into the woods after sunset. She often heard weird sounds out there at night, growling, screaming, howling, though she did admit it could have just been foxes. She never heard of any doctor dying near the lake, but she did remember a series of strange sightings. Finally, Mary Hutchinson, 63. She lived in town her whole life, and she told me something that made my skin crawl. She remembers very clearly that the doctor had moved to the area years ago. She thought he might have been German. She couldn't recall his name, but she said he died when she was in her 30s. I think it was suicide, she said. There were all sorts of rumors. My family never liked him. They all said his family were Nazis. Everybody thought he came over here to get away from what he had done. I'm not sure how much of that is gossip and how much is true, but it did all feel a little bit too close to what we've been dealing with. A foreign doctor. German, maybe. lived in the town, died in a mysterious way, maybe by drowning. The lake, the woods, a man in a white coat who didn't quite move like he should. Everything is weird. Last year, I decided to go back. I went to stay with my parents for a long weekend, and I told myself that I would finally go into the woods again. This time, I would live stream it. If anything happened, there would be some kind of proof. When I decided to go, my phone battery was at 87%. I also had about 10.6 gigabytes of free space. No excuses. I walked into the woods and started streaming. Almost immediately, the connection started to act up. The screen flickered, and the chat struggled to load, but it was still going. So I kept walking, talking quietly into the camera, pointing out where things had happened over the years. After a while, I noticed the sounds. Soft rustles, the crunch of something stepping on twigs behind me, and every time that I turned, shining my flashlight, there was nothing there. I kept going to spots where we always encounter something. When I did, the connection dropped. The live stream got cut off, but the phone kept recording locally, so I just carried on. But that's when the noises picked up. Footsteps running in short bursts, stopping when I stopped, the crack of branches snapping too close to me, things falling from the trees every few seconds, making me flinch again and again. That's when I called out to him, to the doctor, half angry and half terrified. "Show your fucking self." I turned in a slow circle, the flashlight beam sweeping through the trunks. At one point, the light passed over a dense bush. A second later, I heard a twig snap from that way. I held the light steady. The bush was moving, not just swaying in the wind. The branches parted, splitting open as if someone big was pushing through from the other side. But there was nothing there, just darkness beyond the leaves. As it opened, I heard a sound, a low, horrible growl grunt, almost like a dog, but deeper. Without really thinking, I shouted. That's when the bush snapped back into place like someone had let go. Before I could move, something hit me from behind. Now remember, I'm now 6'3", around 230. Whatever it was shoved me flat onto my back like I weighed nothing. The phone tumbled, but I still kept recording the audio. I didn't see what pushed me. I just knew I didn't want to be on the ground out there, so I scrambled up and ran. I could hear my own breathing, the crunch of leaves, and another set of footsteps right behind me. It was matching my pace. By the time that I got close to the edge of the woods, my phone suddenly died in my hand. From fucking 87% to 0 in under 10 minutes. The walk back should have taken 15 to 20 minutes, but it felt like it was half that. When I went inside, Mom and Dylan were in bed. The house was quiet. I sat in the kitchen for a bit, staring out at the dark driveway, trying to calm down, with my phone plugged into a charger. Even there in the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. Eventually, I went back outside and sat on the step at the front of the house, looking down the driveway. My phone was charged. Now it was time to turn on the light and camera again. But at the end of the driveway, 50, 60 feet away, I saw shadows. They were moving where they shouldn't have been any. I got up and walked towards them. "What the fuck do you want?" I shouted. "You pathetic little shit. Here to push me over again? You enjoy knocking people down? Is that it?" The shadow stopped moving. I kept my light fixed on the same spot and slowly got closer. Something caught the beam. A pair of reflective points by a nearby tree, way up off the ground. I stepped in closer, heart pounding. The lights bobbed and shifted like they were ducking in and out from behind the trunk. They were at least 15 feet up. Eyes, too high for any person to be standing. I held the light steady, watching those eyes slip side to side around the tree. Then, they vanished. Then I heard a growl, and something small hit me on the head from above. A pine cone, a stick, something. It didn't matter. It was enough to break my nerve. I quickly turned around and went back to the house. Inside I went straight for the fuse box. All fine, but none of the lights worked. The light to the fridge was out. The living room was dark. The house had power a few minutes earlier. Now it didn't. My phone had stopped charging. I went up to the spare room, sat on the bed with my dead phone, and just waited, listening. I tried the lamp by the bed again. It flicked on. Everything had shifted. The pressure I hadn't even realized that I was feeling faded away, like something had stepped back. Later, when my phone finally came up again, I tried to go from the recording from the woods. There were scratches on my arms and one across my neck that I don't remember getting. The audio was full of strange sounds, snapping, growling, in patterns that didn't even match my own movements. I locked every door and window in the house and stayed upstairs until sunrise. And that's it. That's everything I got. 14, 15, or 16 years of the same presence showing up in the same strip of woods and water, starting with a pale arm in the lake, and ending with me shouting into the dark, asking a dead, possibly Nazi doctor, what the fuck he wants. My parents still live there, and the woods are still there. The lake is still there, and the dog still stands at the back door at night, staring into the trees, watching for something that I hope I never have to see again. Out here on the res, there's a rule you don't break, which is to always sleep indoors, never outside in the open, and definitely not outside in the dark sky. It might be warmer and comfortable inside, but that's not the real reason. On the res, the night belongs to the spirits and other things. There's nothing good out there once the sun goes down, nothing you want to invite. I got a story for you. A story about something that happened to my family and to my ex-brother-in-law when he decided to sleep out in his vehicle one night. As with all the stories I have shared with you all out there who like to hear scary stories, it's either a personal experience or a story that was told to me by someone I know or related to in some way. Once again, I'm from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. I live on BIA number 23. It's a 3-mile road that is paved, and at the end of the paved road, it turns into a dirt and gravel road. A few years ago, back around 2006 or 07, I think my ex-brother-in-law was looking for a place to stay the night. We live about 1/4 of a mile off the road down along the creek that has a lot of plum bushes, choke cherry bushes, buffalo berry bushes, and there's a lot of elm trees around, and higher up on the hill, there's a lot of pine trees. In the summertime, when everything is covered with bushes, you wouldn't even know that people lived out here. So he came to my sister's home for the night. It was a mobile home, a trailer you can say, but by then my sister had moved back in with my mom, so the trailer was empty. My sister said that he could stay the night, and he decided to sleep in his vehicle, which was a Tahoe. There were 2 bedrooms in the back of the trailer, and a bathroom. The kitchen was in the middle, then the living room. The master bedroom, as you would call it, was by the front door and had its own bathroom. If I remember correctly, it was a 16 by 70. He laid the back seat down, spread out his blankets on the seat, and lay down for the night. The moon was out, but it wasn't a full moon yet, even though it gave off some light to see. He was trying to go to sleep, but he couldn't, so he was just lying down and watching DVDs on the portable DVD player. He was getting into the movie when he thought he saw something, so he turned it off. I know you all seen the late model Tahoes, They have some dark windows that are hard to see into during the day, let alone at night. It took a while for his eyes to adjust to the dark again, and when they finally did, he could see a dark figure peeking around the back of the trailer near the back bedroom. It came around the corner of it, and that's when it freaked him out. He thought it was a man, but as it came around the corner, it stood up, and that's when he saw how tall it really was. This dark figure's head was above the roof by a good 1.5 feet. It looked into the back bedroom window, stooping down to look in, putting its hands on the roof as it bent down. The dark figure then moved to each window, the bedroom windows, bathroom window, kitchen window, and living room window. At each one, it would stoop down, hands on the roof, and peer inside, rocking slowly back and forth. Watching this figure peek in was freaking him out. He was so scared that he kicked something inside a Tahoe. The movement made the figure stand up suddenly, turn, and look towards the Tahoe. My ex-brother-in-law just covered his head with his blankets and didn't move. Terrified and hoping that the figure would just go away, he lay like that for a good 10 minutes. And just as he thought whatever it was had left, he felt the Tahoe move slightly. It rocked back and forth as something leaned against the side of the window by the cargo area. He slowly lifted the blanket off his head and looked out. The dark figure was looking into the Tahoe. Its hands were cupped around its forehead and eyes. It was slowly rocking back and forth. In the moonlight, he could see the shape of its head and shoulders as it bent down to look in at him. All he could say was that it looked really ugly. He pulled the blankets back over his head and waited. He could feel the Tahoe rocking as the figure looked in, trying to see inside. He doesn't know how long this thing looked in, but eventually, the rocking stopped. He then waited even longer before peeking out again. When he finally did, the thing was gone. He jumped into the driver's seat, threw on the ignition, put it into reverse, and took off. The next morning he called the house, and my sister was surprised to find out that he had left in the middle of the night. My ex-brother-in-law told her what happened. My sister told me and my brother, and we went over right away. We didn't find any footprints or evidence, only the spot where he had spun out in the dirt. Since that night, he barely ever stays over, and if he does, he keeps close to the blue security light or sets up extra lights around his tent. I don't know for sure if what he saw was Bigfoot, or maybe even a dark man, but around here, we know that a dark man is something you don't want to see outside your window. Who knows what it truly was? What I do know is that you shouldn't be breaking the rule about always sleeping indoors at night. The open air can leave you exposed to spirits, or other things. Sleeping in the vehicle, under the night sky, might have left him open to see these things, or whatever was out there, making him an easy target. Whatever it was, I remember my nieces and nephews would never sleep in that back bedroom. They always said they felt like something was watching them while they slept. Close the blinds, close the curtains in your room as you go to sleep tonight. This all started about 4 months ago. We were looking at apartments together. Amy was so excited. This would be our first home together. I can still recall the happiness in her voice when she talked about organizing our bedroom. We finally moved into a new apartment building. It was beautiful, but there wasn't much nearby. Just a grocery store, railroad tracks, and a pond. We signed our lease and began moving in. We spent the first few nights at our old apartment. My parents were bringing up their truck to move my bed in, but they were out of town for a few days. We finally were able to bring my bed over, and Amy and I were officially moved in. I ended up buying a bottle of champagne to celebrate. It was one of the happiest days of my life. However, all of that came crashing down when I woke up the next morning. I was a little hungover, but I noticed that Amy wasn't in bed with me. I looked up to see that she was standing in the corner of our room, face turned towards the wall. "Amy, what are you doing?" I asked. No response. She didn't move. She didn't turn around. Nothing. Amy, what's wrong? I got up and put my hand on her. She was stiff as a board. I tried to pull her away from the wall, but she wouldn't move. I pulled with everything that I could, but I couldn't break her away from the corner. It's almost like she was magnetized to the wall. I started to freak out and called 911. I told them that I needed an ambulance, that my girlfriend is unresponsive. While I waited for the ambulance to arrive, I reached out to her parents. Hey, it's me, David. You guys need to get here now. I found Amy standing in the corner and she won't respond. Who is this? Her father asked. It's me, David. Didn't you hear me? Your daughter is in trouble and you need to get here fast. I don't know, David, and I don't have a daughter either. I think you have the wrong number, pal. He hung up on me. I looked through my phone to see if I called the wrong number. I didn't. I could see all the previous times I had called that same number. I even found a text with him about planning Amy's birthday. Her father, Phil, likes to joke around, but he took it too far this time. I called him back. Straight to voicemail. I yelled into my phone, Look, Phil, I don't know what your problem is, but this is no time for jokes. Something is really wrong with Amy and you need to get her now. As I hung up the phone, there was a knock at my door. It was the police. I opened the door and I explained everything. I took them into my room to see if they could get her to move. Son, is this a joke? The officer asked. What do you mean? Just see if you can help her. Where's your girlfriend? There's no one in there. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I became explosive and started to yell. I'm not sure what's going on here, but you need to help my girlfriend. I need to know if she's okay. The officer told me to calm down or he would detain me. After he quickly checked to make sure I wasn't on drugs, he chose to leave. I begged him to stay and help her. He told me to stop wasting the police's time and then left. I ran back over to Amy to see if I could try to move her. She was still standing in the same exact position. She hadn't moved in about an hour. I bent down to get a look at her face. She had a blank expression. I noticed that she was still breathing and blinking, however. Amy, please, tell me what's happening. I tried to move her again. That's when I looked up and realized that her plant that she kept on the window was gone. When I looked around the room, I noticed that everything that she owned was gone. I ran into our closet. All of her clothes had just disappeared. I then ran all around the apartment. Nothing. Everything she owned. We had spent days moving into this place, and everything just vanished. Even her own car was gone. I decided to contact the property office to see if they caught anything that happened to her car on camera. When I explained the situation, they told me that I rented that apartment by myself. No, I didn't, I said. You guys saw Amy and I signed the lease agreement. Can you please just look through the parking lot video from last night? The guy said he would, but he assured me that my signature was the only one on my lease agreement. I went to find my copy and sure enough, all of her signatures and initials have disappeared from the paperwork. I felt like I was gonna vomit. My head was spinning with a million questions. I spent the next few hours trying to get Amy to budge from that corner. I eventually gave up and cried myself to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, my situation hadn't changed. She was still standing in that corner. Nothing had changed. I tried to move her again, but she was like a rock. I noticed she was still blinking and breathing, so I tried to communicate. Amy, if you can hear me, blink twice. Nothing. I decided to ask again. Amy, if you know what's going on, blink twice. Again, nothing happened. She didn't seem to be blinking in some sort of pattern or anything, just blinking sort of normally. I felt like I was losing my mind. I had no answers to why this was going on. I spent the day trying to contact other friends and family. Everyone had pretty much the same response. They all claimed they didn't know her and had no recollection of who I was. Amy was an honor student in high school and always made the honor roll. I tried searching the internet for any school records. Nothing. It was like Amy had vanished off the face of the earth, yet she was still there at the apartment. I spent the next few days searching the internet trying to find any information on Amy. The weeks started to go by. Every day I would wake up and see Amy standing in that same corner. She never moved a muscle. Every day I would try to move her, but I could never do it. I became desperate for answers. I started going on religious paranormal forums. I would ask anybody and everybody if they ever seen anything like this. I even went to forums on Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, pagan, paranormal investigators, and even magicians. I asked everyone I could. Nobody had any answers. Nobody had ever experienced or heard about anything like what was happening to me. Eventually, I just gave up. It's been 4 months since this happened. I'm now gotten used to it. I do try to spend as little time as possible in the bedroom. I really only go in there to sleep or get dressed. I feel so heartbroken, like I lost Amy. Yet every night, I see her just standing there. She still hasn't moved one bit in 4 months. She's still blinking, still breathing. I could just sleep out on the couch, but I like listening to her breathing when I'm trying to sleep. Hearing her breathe is actually soothing to me. I see her every day, but I feel like I lost her. The apartment is so quiet without her. I miss her voice, her smile. I miss the arguments. It hurts me so much to look at her now, just to see her standing there, not moving. That blank expression every time I look at her face. I can't take it anymore. I was planning on finding another place to live and move on. Then, the unthinkable happened. She moved. I woke and found that Amy was no longer in the corner. She was standing at the foot of my bed. She had a big smile stretched across her face. Her teeth were showing. She was no longer breathing or blinking. She was staring directly into my eyes. I just sat there in shock. I have no idea how long we were staring at each other. Neither of us moved a muscle. Finally, I said, "Amy, what's going on? What happened to you?" She didn't say anything to me. She started to slowly lift up her hand and reach out to me. It was as if time stood still. She never broke eye contact. I then yelled, "Amy, what are you doing? I haven't spoken to you in so long. Please, just tell me what's happening." She finally spoke to me.
"David, it's time for you to come join me. Take my hand, David. Come with me."
I haven't heard her voice in so long. I broke down. I jumped out of bed and grabbed her face. "Please, Amy, I beg you, just tell me what's happening. What's been going on with you?" And she never said anything after that. She just stood there smiling with her hands stretched out. She never broke eye contact with me. I decided that I can't stay here anymore. I packed and was ready to leave, and I was going to stay with my parents until I could find a new place. As much as it pains me, I needed to move on. Whatever this thing is that's in my bedroom is not Amy. As I was packing my bags, I looked over at Amy, and she had a tear running down her face. She still hadn't moved since this morning, still smiling and still sticking her hand out. Amy and I had been through so much together. She was the love of my life. It was like my heart was being ripped out from the thought of leaving her here. I decided to cancel my hotel reservation and spend one last night with her before going to my parents. As I laid in bed, I had this incredibly uneasy feeling. She wasn't breathing this time. Every time that I looked up, all I could see was her standing there, still smiling, staring right at me. I didn't sleep well that night. When I woke up, I had received dozens of texts and phone calls. All of them were from unknown numbers. Every text that I read was apparently sent by Amy. They were urging me to come join her. All I had to do is grab her hand. I started to listen to the voicemails. It was Amy's voice. She was crying.
"David, please. I need you to come with me. Please. I need you to grab my hand. David, please. I need you to come with me. Please. I need you to grab my hand. David, please. I need you to come with me. Please. I need you to grab my hand.
Every single voicemail was saying the same thing. I looked back at Amy. She still had her hand out. I miss her so much. I would like nothing more than to see her again. I already sent goodbye text messages to my family and friends. A lot of them are trying to call me right now, but I'm not answering. As I'm writing this, I noticed that Amy's eyes have started to bleed, and her smile has become a lot more twisted. I just hope that I'm making the right choice here. When Pancho and his wife came to live in our town in Mexico, they did so overnight. Literally, overnight. It was past 11 p.m. when a cargo truck arrived at the house that had been empty for a few years. The previous owners had left and had long been trying to sell the house. It seemed like they were finally able to. And that night, 3 men unloaded the truck and carried a few belongings into the house. It must have taken them about 3 hours to arrange all the furniture inside. Once everything was done, 2 of them left in the same truck, leaving Pancho behind. Some neighbors watched from their windows, finding it a bit weird that a family or one single person would move in the middle of the night into the neighborhood. As days passed, Pancho became part of our community. He made friends quickly, and his attitude always made him well liked by his neighbors. Pancho worked as a carpintero in carpentry, and little by little, he brought in his tools and some outdated machinery as well. He didn't seem to make much money, but it didn't really seem to get at him. If anything, he seemed extremely happy. However, he did have some strange habits. The neighbors would say that sometimes he would leave his house for several hours. He would leave 2 long chains hanging on the gate that opened the street. Some people saw him throwing handfuls of salt on the ground at night in front of his house. When asked about the reason for these things, he always gave the same response. It's for protection. Where I'm from, brujería te persigue. Witchcraft follows you. And just like that, people wouldn't ask about it again. Everyone down in Mexico knows that places are full of witchy stuff. Everyone has their own ways of protection from the evil. I compare this to where you might be living at. If you saw your neighbor coming out every night and praying around their house and throwing stuff on the ground, it would most likely raise something in your head, wouldn't it? Also, this town was really small, so everyone noticed everything. Then one night, we heard some loud banging and shouting coming from Pancho's house. Those who could grabbed machetes and headed towards the house, thinking that someone was trying to rob him. We didn't have any sorts of guns down here, except for pitchforks and machetes. We were a small community and we all looked out for one another. Anyways, we approached the house, and the closer we got, the louder the noises and shouting became. We could see shadows through the curtains that appeared to be 2 men fighting, but the voice we heard was Pancho's, and the rest were just growls and shouts. From the door, some of the neighbors began to shout, "Pancho, ¿qué anda pasando? Abre la puerta. ¿Necesitas ayuda o qué, Pancho? Pancho, open up. Open the door. What's going on? Do you need help?" Suddenly, the noises stopped, and the lights went out. After about 2 minutes, the front door opened. "Buenas noches, amigos. I'm sorry for the noise," Pancho said in a calm voice, with a look of shame. One of the neighbors said, "We heard some shouting and a whole bunch of commotion. We thought someone had broken in or something like that." At that moment, a woman with shiny black hair, beautiful eyes, and wide hips appeared in the light of the entrance. She appeared behind Pancho. She introduced herself. "Sorry about this. We didn't mean to make so much noise. Nice to meet you all. I'm his wife." Everyone looked at each other, and also at Pancho, who kept his eyes down the entire time. We all introduced ourselves and apologized for intruding. All of us embarrassed, turned around and left. I would also be starting up a fight in my house if I hadn't seen my woman, who looks like that, in a long time. One of them joked as they walked away, laughing. The next morning, Pancho's wife was seen walking around the town, buying food and other household items. She attracted the attention of just about everyone, and even caused jealousy around the other women. Everything in Pancho's house seemed normal, except that his attitude had changed. He went from being a cheerful, friendly neighbor to being quiet, almost shy, like isolated, and this all started ever since his wife had arrived. Pancho seemed to have shut down completely. In the next few days, she was the one who would be seen at the market shopping for groceries and items, and slowly, Pancho stopped coming around, and even though she wasn't a bad person, the other townspeople didn't trust her. It had been about 3 weeks since the arrival of Pancho's wife when one night, a neighbor who was coming back from celebrating a soccer championship and drinking claimed to have seen Pancho's wife leaving through one of the windows. Once she was out in the street, he claims that she turned into a black dog and headed towards the highway. The neighbor had been drinking, and his own wife obviously didn't believe him. But the jealousy that Pancho's wife had caused among all the women in the town caused the rumor to spread like crazy through the town. Suddenly, more reports started coming out. More people had seen her do this a few times the next few weeks, and one story that made everyone say something was when a neighbor said that one night a black dog was seen stealing chickens from a yard. It's quite common in small towns in Mexico for people to fear nahuales. Some stories say that they are witches who steal children and offer them as sacrifices in exchange for more black magic powers. Others say it's something that you're born with, and once you control that gift, you can use it for good or evil. The most extreme stories claim that nahuales are sent by the devil to punish those who have sold their soul. Now because of this, fear grew in the town and people wanted to know what was going on. Night after night, people watched from their windows. Shit, even I started watching, but I never saw anything, simply because I didn't stay in the same street as they did. But from my window you could barely see the sidewalk of their house. Everyone was hoping to catch sight of something, but nobody saw anything, and there was no trace of the black dog. Meanwhile, everything else seemed normal. Then one night, a very nice big truck drove down the town's roads, playing loud music. Now this is very uncommon because the only times you see these trucks are people who are in the cartel, or someone who came from the States, showing their money and what they got. It wasn't very late, so people were still awake. A lot of curious neighbors stepped out to see what was going on. I know because I stepped out as well. Everyone can claim that women are nosy, but we men are nosy too. I think we just, quote unquote, hide it a bit more. Anyways, the truck turned down the street and went straight to Pancho's house. It waited there for about 5 minutes until his wife came out. She was dressed in tight clothes, ready for a party, you could tell, with high heels and everything else. She got into the truck and they drove off with the music still blasting. This is when the gossip in the town exploded. No one could believe that someone was cheating on Pancho, a hard-working and friendly man. They hizo brujeria. She bewitched them, people would say. Then one day, in one of the town's cantinas, a bar, we were all gathered together that night and Pancho showed up to drink as well. But he decided to sit in the corner by himself. After some time, some of the men approached him wanting to see what was going on, but he refused to talk. We all said to just let it be and give it another hour or so, because alcohol causes loose lips. And sure enough, after about an hour, he didn't start talking, but he started crying, talking to himself, mumbling to himself in the corner and looking sad. The same neighbor who had started the rumor about Pancho's wife was also in the cantina. We all noticed Pancho still alone, and the neighbor decided to approach him. Pancho shrugged him off, insisting he wanted to keep drinking, but the neighbor was telling him that that was enough, and that he needed to go home. After some back and forth, Pancho finally told him, "I don't have a ride home, and I didn't plan on heading back so soon, but if you could take me, I'll be more than grateful." The neighbor agreed to give him a ride, and after some time they both ended up leaving the cantina. Then, he began to speak. He finally opened up about everything that he had been going through. I met my wife at a dance. She was the most beautiful one there. She caught my attention, and at that time, I was working offshore in an oil rig, and I was doing pretty well. I remember the first night. I approached her and invited her to dance with me. We ended up dancing all night. Then we went for some beers and talked for a bit. When I offered to take her home, she said no, that she was going somewhere else, but that we would see each other again. So we said goodbye and I left without even knowing her name. A few days later, I was about to head back to work, but I had to take a bus. And there at the bus station I saw her. She approached me and said, "I told you we would meet again." We didn't talk much that day, not a whole lot because the bus was gonna leave pretty soon. As we were saying goodbye, she gave me a plastic bracelet. She said it was a love bracelet, and that way I can remember her, and that she would be waiting for me when I came back. I'm starting to think it really was some sort of love spell, or something, but not the one in fairy tales. I started seeing that woman in my dreams. I was on the oil platform, and I would wake up every half hour because I felt someone else's breath beside me. I would see her face on the faces of some of my coworkers. Thought I was in love or something like that. I wasn't. Eventually, I started seeing her face in the mirrors, alone at night, in my dreams, and even out in the pitch black in the ocean. Then one night, as I was walking the rig, her face appeared in places, staring back at me in the faint reflection of my own face on the control panels. But the worst came later. I was doing a final check one night, stepping around the pathways. Now, if you haven't been on one of those rigs, there are places and pathways that are completely dark, simply because of the shadows cast by certain parts of the rig. In one of those dark pathways, there was something that caught my attention. At first, it looked like the shape of a person, crouching down in the shadow, but as I focused, I saw its face. It was twisted. It was her, but yet it wasn't her. Her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, exposing rotting teeth, her eyes hollow. Then her face began to shift even more, turning into something with the long features of a horse. Then it transformed into a black dog with yellow eyes. That's when I turned around and she was there again, watching me from just beyond the edge of the rig's lights. I jumped back, almost slipping over the rail, feeling my heart race like it was ready to burst. Every hair on my body stood up. I didn't even finish the inspection, and I went back inside begging for someone else to do it. When I came back 2 weeks later, the first thing I did was go look for her. I didn't know her name or where she even lived, but for some reason, I knew she was going to be at the bus station again. And sure enough, there she was, sitting on a bench with someone. I walked up to her and we started talking. I know this was stupid of me, but I invited her out for a drink. We went to a bar, ate, and shared a bottle of whiskey. That's when she finally told me her name. She said that her name was Lucifera Maria Santísima Cruz. I don't know if it was the love spell or simply the temptation to make her my girlfriend, but I wanted to be with her. So that same afternoon, I told her I wanted her to be my girlfriend, and she said yes. From that moment on, I gave her everything. I always kept a little bit for my mom, but little by little, I stopped giving my mom anything and gave it all to that woman. As time went on, my mother became ill and passed away. I remember one of the things my mom said to me was, "Mijo, find a good woman to marry." I misunderstood those words, and I did the exact opposite. I ended up proposing to that woman, and that's when everything began. The money wasn't enough, and she did spend it all on herself. She even made me work without rest for 2 weeks straight so I could bring more money home. My friend said that I was stupid, but I didn't believe him. One time, there was an accident at the platform where I worked, and for safety reasons, we were all sent home earlier than expected. I immediately went home and checked in the next night. When I got to the house, I saw a man by the window of my bedroom. When he saw me, he ran away and turned off the light. I rushed inside, thinking that somebody had broken in, but when I got to the bedroom, there was nothing but my wife's clothes all around the floor, and she wasn't even there. I also couldn't find the man that I had seen by the window. I even called her cell phone, and it was right there on the wooden dresser. I went crazy looking for her and ran around the neighborhood asking neighbors and everyone if they had seen Lucifera. That's when the neighbor across the street told me that they had seen my wife bring a man into the house when I wasn't around, but they never saw him leave. They also said that they saw my wife leaving at strange hours of the night, but they never saw her come back. The neighbor also mentioned that my dog had gone missing as well, as he was never seen or heard again after a few days, except I didn't have a dog. I told my sister what happened, and she said that we talked to my godmother, who knew all about these kind of things. My godmother asked for some of my wife's dirty clothes and a piece of her hair. 2 days later, we went to go see her. My godmother told me that my wife was a nahual who transformed into a dog, and that she also had me bound, which is why I wasn't aware of anything that was going on. She also said that the man my wife was cheating on me with was most likely also a nahual, and more than likely her long-term partner. She told me that my wife was taking all my money to live with her lover, and that once she had nothing left to take from me, she was gonna leave me, or something worse would happen. According to my godmother, the spell could no longer be undone because I had sworn before witnesses, until death do us apart. She said that undoing it would be extremely difficult and dangerous, because if anything went wrong, the consequences could be fatal. But she did give me some protection methods. She told me that salt repels nahuales, and that if I could find where my wife kept the skin of the animal she transformed into, I could cover it in salt. That way, when she transformed, she wouldn't be able to go back to her human form. But I was never able to find the skin. She also told me to recite a specific psalm from the Bible, and that it could keep me hidden from her eyes, and to take a bath with a special soap that would mask my scent from her. However, none of this would last forever. Lucifera realized that I was protecting myself from her spells, and eventually, she started messing with my family. My sister became ill, as did my nieces and nephews, and the doctors couldn't find a remedy. They had to go to a brujo to get rid of the curse that had been put on them. I did quit my job because I thought that if I didn't have money, she would leave me for someone else, but everything went bad. She ended up saying that she was going to kill someone that I loved, or do something even worse if I didn't give her a certain amount of money. It went on like this for almost 4 years until one day, she just disappeared. I ended up moving to another city to live and work in a lumber yard. My sister and I stayed in touch through an ex-girlfriend who was friends with my sister and didn't know this woman. It gave me peace to hear that Lucifera actually sold the house and left. At least she wouldn't hurt my family anymore, or come looking for me. 7 months passed and I was actually at peace. I even started dating another woman. Then one night, I was asleep, and she appeared at my bedroom. That's when I saw her true self. She transformed into an animal right in front of me to show me what she really was. After a few days, I figured I would simply run away. Disappear, you can say. And I thought that by choosing this remote place where you all live, with people who didn't really know me, I could stay hidden. The house was sold at a very affordable price, and I used my last savings to set up the shop that I have. I thought she wouldn't find me, but she did. And now I'm not sure how to get rid of her. I have even tried ending my own life to escape all of this, but I don't want to leave my sister alone. I'm the only family that she has left. That's when the neighbor that was taking him home turned back around to the bar and he brought him back to us. He told all of us the same story again, and we didn't know what to do. So the only idea we came up with was to have him sleep for a few days in the town's chapel. We thought this would prevent this woman from coming to see him. 2 nights went on without Pancho leaving the chapel, except a black dog could be seen walking outside the chapel every night, barking and howling. On the 3rd day, a neighbor told Pancho that he had an idea, but it involved going back to the house and provoking her so she would transform, and then trying to restrain her as much as possible while someone else spread salt outside the house, to trap her inside. Once she was trapped inside, we could all gather to kill her. He agreed, but he thought the idea was a bit extreme, but he had no other choice. That night, when the woman returned to the house, They started fighting, and Pancho confronted her. The whole block could hear terrifying screams and the sounds of things breaking. We all then ran with sacks of salt to form a circle around the house. We covered the windows and doors with salt as well. We then armed ourselves with sticks and machetes, and only one person had a gun as a last resort. We entered the house in search of the woman. In front of everyone's eyes, she transformed into a dog. And she did try to escape, but when the animal touched the sod outside the house, it would just howl in pain. That's when we all threw everything we could at it, and we were able to hurt it until the first machete hit its ribs hard. The dog let out a shriek, and we all saw the animal stand on two legs, trying to return to its human form, but we weren't gonna let it. We kept hitting it on the head and legs until it was unconscious. When this dog could no longer move and appeared to stop breathing, that's when we dragged it up a hill. We poured gas over its body and set it on fire. Its twisted body was motionless. We all stood there in silence. It was Pancho who finally said something, his voice shaking as he whispered, "It's over. It's finally over." One by one, we all gathered around, clutching our machetes still dripping with blood. Others were holding sticks or makeshift weapons. As the body continued to burn, we all saw headlights from a car approaching. We thought it was the police because of all the noise we had made, but we had the perfect excuse. A rabid dog had broken loose and entered Pancho's house. That's why we killed it. And to prevent the body from decomposing, we decided to burn it. It seemed like a smart plan, but the surprise was that it wasn't a police car. It was a black truck with dark windows. A man got out, stood in the distance, and was just watching while smoking a cigarette. We all grabbed our weapons and machetes because we recognized the truck. It was the man who came for Pancho's wife at night. But the man wasn't doing anything. He quickly put his cigarette out. He quickly got back into the truck and drove away without saying anything. After that night, Pancho was never the same. He seemed terrified all the time, and people saw him talking to himself in the streets. He also fell into the habit of drinking heavy. One of the neighbors was able to contact his sister and told her what happened to Pancho. A few days later, his sister came for him, and they packed up the whole house, and the house was eventually put up for sale. But to this day, no one in our town wants to buy that house. It just sits there. People who cross the street avoid walking too close, just simply taking quick glances at the windows, which seems darker than any other in town. It's not just a memory of what happened that keeps everyone away. Everyone says that there's still something there, lingering around and hidden, waiting. People claim that the walls are stained with all sorts of witchcraft symbols, and even objects that Pancho's wife used. Those few people that have gone to peek inside swear that they could feel eyes watching them from every corner. So the talk of the town is to not go inside houses like that, especially when they have been marked by witchcraft. There are some things that can be washed away, no matter how many times you scrub it clean. And then there's the talk of the man. Who was he? Some do say that he was a nagual. Maybe it was her lover. Others, however, say that it was the devil himself. Nobody in the town ever saw him again. Some people do say that he's gonna come back, or that she's gonna come back for the house one day. So no one's ever heard from Pancho anymore, and no one ever goes near this house. However, sometimes late at night, you can hear the faint sounds of a woman laughing, the growling of a dog, or the echo of a woman's voice, yet very far away. But it sounds like some sort of chanting, as if someone is casting some sort of spell. Last night I came back from one of those mental health camping trips. The ones where all you bring is an emergency radio and a digital camera. Other than what I'm about to tell you, it was actually insanely good for my health. I was struggling with my job for a little bit, and let's be honest, I was also struggling with life in general, but I was finally able to simply relax. It actually felt like the first time in years, to be honest. I came back a new person, a fresh start to write the rest of my life on. I later found out I came back a new person, in a more literal way. The camping part was good. I enjoyed some fishing, cooked with a campfire, met some other people on their own retreat as well. You know, the normal camping stuff. I also took lots of pictures. A week after I arrived, I packed up all my things and went back to my truck, ready to go back to my home. The ride back went good, but I do have to admit, that first night of sleeping in my own bed felt so fucking good. I woke up this morning and decided to go through my photos before heading out to work, to see what I wanted to download to my computer and what I wanted to trash. This is where things got strange, odd. The first picture was of me with a group of about 6 other people. I don't remember a single one of these guys. All of their faces were blurry, like they turned their heads right away as the picture was being taken of them. We all had our hands around each other, and the girl next to me was getting really close and personal with my waist, but I don't remember a single one of them. This catches me off guard. I just know I went camping alone, but from the looks of these pictures, I can see my tent in the background, with a couple of other tents placed there too, all in perfect condition. It felt like I was staring at a different reality, like what could have been if I went with a group. Eventually, I shrugged it off as maybe drinking a little too much one night, and forgetting about a group of people that just set up with me for the night. You know, an excuse that made me feel less insane. Eventually, I scrolled through the rest of the pictures. Some of them are things I remember, like fishing and cooking, but they always had other people in it, as they were all removed by my memories. And like always, the faces were all blurry. Now I go to the second day's worth of pictures. At the beginning of the day, there seems to be the same picture as before, except the guy all the way to the left wasn't in the picture anymore, just simply gone. Again, the same process continues. The rest of the pictures that day are the ones I remember, but simply with more people added that I don't remember. I look at the next day, and another person disappears. The next day, another one, and then another. Again, another one goes. Continuing the process until there is just me and this woman left, her arms around my waist, hugging me with a blurry face. I noticed that all of the tents were still there, but they were all torn and broken as if they just got out of a storm, except mine, which was perfect. Now I'm freaking out, trying to make sense of what happened. Who were they? Where are they? What is happening? And why is it that I can't remember? I look down at my watch and notice that I have been pondering over these photos for way too long, and was a couple of hours late for work. I shoved the camera into my bag, and since I was already dressed, I ran to the car. I get into the office about half an hour later. Walking in, I get a few looks from some of the employees, but shrug them off heading to my office. One of them walks up to me to ask me something I don't think I'll ever forget. "Where's your wife?" "My wife?" "Yeah, her and the rest of management. You all went on a retreat, and you're the first one to come back." I look at my desk and notice the picture, with all 7 of us from the original photo. I quickly open up my camera and go back to the first photo, matching the bodies up with each other to confirm them. Sure enough, they were the management that I worked with, but I still don't remember a single one of them. I scroll to the last photo I took, and see me, only me, and 6 bodies, hanging, suspended from the trees behind me, with their heads all forcefully bent in a 90-degree angle. Who was taking all these pictures? If you're reading this, congratulations. I'm most likely dead, or maybe worse. My name is Daniel, and I own quite a bit of land up in the Appalachian Mountains, left to me by my great auntie. So far, in the years I lived here, paranormal and downright disturbing things have happened to me here. People told me to just leave or report it, like I never done that before. To them, I'm just the young guy that went crazy a little too early. It bothers me that normal people have no idea what goes on up here, all alone. You see, my first encounter with them, I didn't know how to deal with them. I didn't even know what they were called until recently. It's important, or at least it's important to me that some of the tricks I have learned throughout the 3 years I lived up here could be of use to somebody one day. My second, or maybe third time I was being stalked by a skinwalker, it felt like I was walking in circles. I had a camera with an SD card pretty deep in the woods, but when I tried to walk back to my cabin, I kept passing the camera. I was walking in circles. This went on for hours. The sun was setting soon, and I was quite thirsty at the time, I remember. I sat up against the tree my camera was mounted on, and actually started crying. It was watching me, I guess waiting for me to fall dead. I hit myself in desperation a few times, trying to think. I sat up and took a very deep breath, wiped the water from my eyes, and it dawned on me. It's gotta be messing with my equilibrium. I have to be off balance, there's no other way, but I could still walk. But my depth perception was slightly off. All I had to do was tilt my head as far as it would go into my shoulder and walk back to my cabin. My ear was pressed into my shoulder, but even with one ear, I could still hear how anxious the creature sounded, pacing in the woods, hoping I didn't get away. Once I made it inside my cabin, I didn't come out for a couple of days, for safe measures. Another trick they know is mimicking animals. I found that they like coyotes. I actually used to hunt coyotes back home, but never up here in the mountains. I seen a couple of my deer cameras that it looked like. Right after I left my camera, a coyote would follow me a while, if not all the way home. I had to stop that real quick and set out some snares. All the snare would and could do is jam the coyote's legs into the mechanism until a button is pressed, and then it could be unlocked. I set out a couple of them, but also rubbed some white ash on all the traps, and sure enough, the next time I started walking back from my camera, I hear the sound of one go off. I quickly ran back to where I had laid the traps, with a gun drawn, and all that was left was the trap in 3 separate pieces, and the scent of burning hair in the air. Every time I checked the camera after that, a coyote with a nasty burn scar on its leg would stop where the camera was mounted and turn around and walk back into the brush. And lastly, do not engage in any type of combat with them. Warding them off is one thing, but actually hunting them is a mistake. I wish I would have known that sooner. I had 2 buddies back in town I used to tell my stories to. Alcohol loosens the lips. Their names were James and Cole. I'm pretty sure they were cousins, but I never asked. Thinking about it now, I wish I would have gotten to know them better. But long story short, they're dead. And now, I'm dying. This morning, they came and pounded in my door insisting we hunt these skinwalkers. I told them it was a very bad idea, but they even took the liberty of buying silver bullets. They told me how much they cost, but I can't remember right now. I finally caved and we got ready all day. We first started making a large amount of white ash, cleaning our guns. Heck, they even packed MREs and special high-dollar spotlights. We set off right as the sun went down. We weren't 3 hours in when disaster struck. We were all sitting around a tree. I could tell that the skinwalkers were watching us. They're all around us, multiple. I'm scanning everything with my spotlight, not even realizing that Cole wasn't with us anymore. I asked James where he was, but he didn't seem nervous at all, and told me he may have had to go pee. I turned back to face my front, and there I see Cole. He's a good distance out, but something wasn't right. He was contorting in ways a human could never. I started to turn around to ask James what we should do, but halfway around, I heard James, guttural, sounding, breathing, like his lungs were filling with blood. I couldn't stand to be there anymore, and booked it back to the cabin. The forest seemed like it was laughing at me. In my desperation to run home, I knocked my flashlight running, and it was slowly getting dimmer and dimmer. I eventually had to ditch it and use some of the flares that Cole and James brought. I pulled the top off and struck it against a tree, and the red flame lit up the surrounding forest. There were so many of them, 10, 20, maybe more. But as luck would have it, they never attacked me. I could see the cabin and flung the door open and shut it behind me. I ran for the upstairs bedroom and quickly got into the old wooden closet where I'm currently typing this. I don't hear them, but they're outside my house. Unfortunately, in the midst of running away, I did end up getting clawed, or maybe bit. It's not a terrible wound, but it's bleeding black. If you're reading this, if you can, please send help. I really do need it this time. We made a huge mistake. We thought it would be a fun idea, I promise. Me and my roommate Nolan, we like collecting random weird stuff. Nolan likes thrifting and dumpster diving. I like to build stuff in the garage or collect weird trinkets. If you had asked me a week ago what the worst thing we had ever found when looking through the garbage was, I would have told you that it was a bag of dog shit. That was until we found these things. It was a few days ago, and me and Nolan were cruising through some local alleys in my car, looking for treasure. We had found a few small things, some cool old plates, a busted painting, and a nice wooden side table. We were driving behind a strip mall, passing some dumpsters, when Nolan grabbed me by the shoulder. "Dude, look," he said, pointing to a dumpster just ahead of us, where a set of white feet were poking up from the top. I immediately pulled the car over and parked it in front of the dumpster. We got out, hopped up on the ledge of the dumpster, and peered inside. Mannequins. Sick, I grinned. "You think we can actually fit them?" Nolan asked, looking at me. "We'll make them fit. Here, you fish them out, and I'll make space," I said, as I stepped down and popped the trunk of the car. I moved a few things we had found so far into the trunk, and pointed out that the mannequins could actually be stacked horizontally in the back seat. There were 3 of them. Definitely not brand new, but not too bad for a dumpster find. A few scuffs and scratches here and there, but it wouldn't be an issue. This was a good enough find to make us return home satisfied with what we got, which we actually did. We unloaded and stacked everything in the garage, and brushed off our new treasure, the mannequins. "What should we do with them?" Nolan asked. We both pondered for a moment. "You know what would be hilarious?" I started. "What if we put speakers in them and made them say creepy shit to scare people?" "That's fucking genius," Nolan smiled, nodding his head. We spent the next hour or 2 cutting holes in the backs of the mannequins' heads and taping some small Bluetooth speakers into them. We found an app that would let us broadcast our voices from our phones directly to the speakers. So we spent the rest of the afternoon playing around with that until we got bored. We sent a few pictures and videos of them to our friends, who actually all thought that we were crazy. The other 2 roommates we had were not thrilled at the idea of the weird speaking mannequins being part of the household, but we waved them off and told them that they would get used to it. However, I wish we would have listened to them. It was the next morning, as I was having a cup of coffee and browsing Instagram at the kitchen table that Nolan had brought, laughing as soon as he saw me. "Yeah, you got me good with that one last night, man," he said. "Huh? You know, the mannequin you put outside my bedroom door. Real spooky, huh?" he said. Was it me?" I said. "It must have been Amy or Sunny." "Yeah, sure, whatever. I'm gonna get you back though, just you wait," Nolan said with a dismissive wave of his hand, as he took a cup of coffee for himself and went back upstairs. That day passed as any Saturday would, mostly doing nothing. A bit of cleaning around the house. Later in the evening, we invited a couple of friends over so that we could crack open a few beers and have a fire in the backyard. We showed off the mannequins, and everyone actually hated them except for me and Nolan. We didn't really care though, but we actually put them back inside so that they wouldn't bother people too much. "I'm going to the bathroom, y'all. Does anyone need anything?" I asked everybody standing up from the fire. 1 or 2 people wanted beers, so I nodded and went inside. The bathroom door was slightly open and the lights were off, so I figured that nobody was in there. I pushed the bathroom door open. I jumped back suddenly as I saw one of the mannequins standing in the middle of the bathroom.
"Boo,"
came a voice from the speaker in its head. "Oh, fuck off, man," I said as my fear turned into laughing. I picked up the mannequin and carried it to the living room.
"Put me down. Put me down."
The mannequin cried as I carried it.
"Unhand me, Rylan."
"Shut it, Nolan," I said as I propped the mannequin in the corner of the living room. I went back outside with the requested beers and flipped Nolan off as I stepped down the deck stairs. He laughed and waved me off. We spent the rest of the night drinking and laughing. The fire was turning into coals and most of our friends had left by about 2 in the morning. I finished my final beer and I told everyone good night as I threw the can on our pile of empties. I stumbled back inside and pushed my bedroom door open. I was too drunk to be scared this time, so I merely chuckled to see all 3 mannequins lined up on the far side of my bed. One of them had its arm extended, the hand pointing to the bed.
"Sleepy time,"
said one of the mannequins. I sighed and moved all of them back out to the living room, wondering if rescuing these things was going to make more of a hassle than worth it. I went back to the room and closed my door and crawled into bed, falling asleep to the peaceful hum of the air conditioner. I woke up late and rolled over to check my phone. I scrolled through a few Instagram notifications, checked the news on Reddit, and then almost had a heart attack when I got out of my bed to make my way to the bathroom.
"Rise and shine,"
said the mannequin standing at the foot of my bed. The faces of the mannequins we had found were now blank, almost very smooth, without details. But Nolan had drawn a smiley face in Sharpie on this one. I reached over to my nightstand, and I threw a copy of the Game of Thrones at the mannequin, which hit it square in the chest, and made it fall over backwards to the ground.
"Ouchie,"
it said from the floor. I threw on a bathrobe and left the room. I showered and went about my Sunday. When I returned to my room to get dressed, the stupid mannequin was still sprawled on the floor, with a stupid smile on its face. I grabbed it by the arm and dragged it to the living room, where I propped it up with the other mannequins, which now also had smiley faces drawn on their blank faces. Sunny actually worked late that day, and Nolan and Amy were out doing something, so I had the house to myself. After I spent most of the day reading and playing some video games, I decided that I would finish off the last few beers left in the case from yesterday. I grabbed one out of the fridge, took a cigarette from my pack, and stepped out into the back deck. Alright, fuck these things, I said as I saw the 3 mannequins were standing in a circle around the fire pit in the backyard, holding empty beer cans in their hands. I set my beer down, walked back inside, and picked up the baseball bat that I kept next to my bed. I walked back outside. I lit my cigarette and proceeded to knock the head of the closest mannequin clean off. The white head went flying across the backyard.
Home run.
Said one of the mannequins behind me, after which I immediately turned and slashed it across the torso with the bat. I laid into the mannequins, caving in the chest, knocking the heads off and bashing the limbs apart. I picked up the remains of the mannequins and carried them into the alley, where I dropped it all next to the garbage. From garbage you came, and to garbage you shall return, I said to the mannequin parts, and flicked my cigarette into the pile. How the fuck did Nolan do this? I said to myself as I walked back into the backyard. I then smoked another cigarette on the deck. I chugged my beer, grabbed another, and went back to my computer to play some more games. About an hour passed when the nicotine started to call me again, and I went back to the deck for another cigarette. I couldn't tell if I wanted to cry, scream, run, or rage as I stepped outside and saw all 3 of those fucking mannequins standing around the fire pit again. Their heads, however, were all now turned to face me, and where before they had smiley faces, all 3 of them now had frowning faces, drawn by a Sharpie. The worst part, however, was that they all had duct tape wrapped around themselves, reattaching their arms, heads, patching holes, and holding them together where I had smashed them apart. I stood in stunned silence, blinking, pinching myself, hoping I was dreaming for a good minute. I actually felt afraid to even take my eyes off these stupid things. So, staring straight at them, I put the cigarette to my mouth, puffing out the initial cloud of smoke.
Ouchie.
Said one of the mannequins. Breaking our staring contest, I immediately strolled down the stairs, yanking the garage door open and grabbing the jerry can of gasoline that I kept for my lawnmower. I went back into the yard, snapped each of the mannequins in half, threw them in the fire pit, doused them all in gas, and threw my cigarette into the pile. The entire thing went up in a great rush of smoke, and the heat flashed against me so suddenly, I stumbled back from the fire pit. I did flip off the burning pile, and actually sat on one of our deck chairs, silently watching the fire burn. I knew on the inside that Nolan was most likely watching me from somewhere in secret, laughing his ass off at my reaction to these stupid dumpster mannequins. But I didn't care. I hated them at this point, and I didn't give a shit if I looked like an idiot. Once the fire had burned itself all out, all that was left were a few charred pieces that weren't really made out of anything, and a pile of molten, black, something. Plastic maybe. I don't know what they make mannequins out of. I made my way back inside the house, heading for my office. I was walking by the living room when I heard it.
Hot.
I stepped dead, too afraid to look. I slowly turned my head, and in the darkness of the living room, I saw 3 still humanoid shapes. They were charred black, with a wisp of smoke rising off of them to the ceiling. I felt my legs go weak and my heart started racing. I ran back to the bedroom and slammed the door. I threw everything on the top of my dresser to the floor and pitched the whole thing on its side against my door. I sat down on the floor of my room and started to write this. Please, I know that mannequins can't come to life. It's impossible. I know it is. How did Nolan do it? Why did he do it? They're not real. It's a joke. It has to be a joke. Please. You guys are the only ones who know about supernatural, creepy things. I need to know what's happening, or what's going on. I need to know that this isn't real, that I'm dreaming. It has to be that. But I never had a dream like this before. They're right outside the door. I know it, because all they're saying now, over and over, is
Sleepy time.
I'm gonna start this off by saying it's a long read, but it's worth it. My friend and I were talking about this creepy experience we had, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. So I figured I'll turn to Reddit for some answers, if there are any. People might think that this is fake, but I don't care, whether you believe it or not. I have no clue if this animal or creature is a skinwalker or just a very creepy animal. This took place around 2019, and I do live in Tennessee, right on the outskirts of the Appalachian Mountains. So here it goes. 2 of my friends and I were driving on a desolated back road at night. We were jamming to music and talking. Everything was normal. I was driving. My friend Hannah was in the passenger seat, being the DJ, and our friend Chris was in the back seat behind me. Hannah was trying to pull up a song on YouTube that wasn't on Spotify, so it was silent for a bit. While she was waiting on the website to load, Chris and I were still talking. We then came up on a small animal in the road, but I didn't think anything of it. Well, I expected the animal to move pretty quickly once it saw us coming down the road, but it didn't. As I got closer, I slowed down to let the animal have enough time to run off, but it still stayed very still. It almost looked frozen, and the closer I got, I could make out that it looked like some kind of cat. The only thing was, it didn't look like any sort of cat I ever seen. It looked like it had fur, but the fur was flesh colored. Its ears were very small, almost like the ears of a kitten, even though it was only a tiny bit bigger than a house cat. It was laying in a way that looked like the Sphinx was facing us. The scariest thing about it, though, was its eyes. Not to sound over dramatic, but its eyes literally looked like the pits of hell were burning inside of them. They were bright red, orange-like, and had twinkles of yellow in them that reflected off the headlights. As we got closer, the whole car was silent, and I just stared ahead. This cat scared the shit out of me, and it still wasn't moving. I felt a huge pit in my stomach and began having intense anxiety. It was almost like I was frozen, but I was not about to stop to figure out what this cat was. At this point, I had to steer around a bit to pass it without hitting it. I was like 3 inches away from touching this thing, and as I slowly crept by it, I watched it through the window the entire time, and it didn't even flinch, and the eyes still had the same glow even without my headlights directly on it. After we passed it, about 5 seconds later, Chris yells, "What the fuck was that?" I immediately start freaking out and shout, "I don't know." Hannah looks up from her phone and says, What did y'all see?" She looked behind us and kept asking. We explained what happened, and she said, "I didn't see anything behind us." Chris and I looked back, and sure enough, it was gone. We drove up the road to a church and turned around in the parking lot. We now wanted to get back to Hannah's as soon as possible. When we got back, we rushed in and told her mom what we saw. But we didn't mention that it looked like a cat. We described it as a small animal. Her mother stops for a minute and says, "Was it a cat?" We were blown away. We told her it was. And she said that her and a cousin came across the same exact thing when they were teens, only it was in a different area, and they saw it peeking out of the bushes. She still to this day doesn't know what it was, and she said that she thinks about it from time to time, even after 30 years. So I guess I want to know a few things. What was this? It didn't look like a bobcat, mountain lion, or fox. Is it a demon, skinwalker, wendigo, or unknown creature? I heard all of the legends regarding the woods at night. Don't look up in the trees. Don't respond if your mother calls your name. But everyone I have told this to tells me it was most likely a scared bobcat, or that they never heard of anything else before. So if anyone makes it this far and has some answers, I would greatly appreciate any answers. This happened directly to me. At the time of the story, I was a 12-year-old male who lived in California. For a summer trip, me and my family flew to Idaho for a week to stay with my cousins. We stayed at their house for 2 days, then came the best part, until what happened, that is. On the third day, we drove to a small city in the Rocky Mountains of central Idaho. They owned a cabin. The first day was fishing at nearby lakes, playing games, and meeting a few of the neighbors on the small street. Everyone we met was nice. It was amazing. I thought nothing could go wrong. But let me stop here, and before I say more, here's a layout of the area. The room where I slept was at the back of the house. There was no fence at the back of the backyard because it was on the bank of a freezing cold river. Directly on the other side of the river was a huge mountain covered by a thick forest of pine trees. A small path starts on the other side of the river, but there's no bridge. But there is a bridge, a quarter of a mile down the road, in front of our house. I went to bed that night, and I woke up around 2 in the morning, needing to use the bathroom. I got up and did my thing, then headed back to my room. As I got into bed, I felt hot, so I opened my window. Not even 15 minutes after I opened my window, I heard the most terrifying screech come from the forest. It was raspy, but a high-pitched voice. I know for a fact it wasn't human. I heard plenty of stories from YouTube channels that often describe creatures that make weird noises that sound sort of human, but aren't. I heard it once more, but this time, closer. I eventually fell asleep after not hearing it for a while again. In the morning when I woke up, we explored the town. At around 7 p.m., me and my sister and my cousins got permission from our parents to go explore the forest. I felt uneasy, considering the creepy human-like noises in the night that I was hearing. The oldest cousin, Alex, who was 16, took a loaded pistol, a lighter, and backpack of snacks. I carry a hunting knife and a flashlight. The cousin my age, Julia, took just a flashlight. My sister Brianna and the other cousin Karina, who were both 10, took some extra batteries and a small bag of candy each. We made our way across the bridge at the end of the street and back to the path on the side of the river across from the house. All of us began to hike to the top of the mountain. We made it to the top of the mountain in an hour and a half. The view from 9,000 feet was incredible. We then stayed a little bit longer up there, and at 8:55, Alex and I figured it was time to head down, and we ordered the group to the path. At this time, it was dark now, and the sun had fully set. Julia and I turned on our flashlights and shined them ahead as we walked. When we were halfway down the mountain, which was about 45 minutes into the walk, I got this dreadful feeling you get when you're being watched and followed. Seconds later, I heard something coming from the bushes, a few yards into the side of the path that we were walking on. I brushed it off as some type of small animal, and about 5 minutes after this, we heard a noise, and it gripped me with fear, and my heart dropped to my stomach. It was that same horrifying screech from last night, echoing through the forest from a mile or two away. I told everyone we needed to move faster. And we did. The noise went off again, but closer, and again, and closer. Whatever that thing was, it was moving faster than us. We were full on speed walking by then, but it still wasn't fast enough because soon the screeching stopped, and we heard loud steps 30 yards off to the right. I got that feeling that I was being watched again. Alex took his gun and fired 2 shots in the general direction of the steps. The creature backed off, but even though we thought it was gone, I still sensed we were being watched. As the river came into sight, it caught me and everyone else by surprise. I heard the path of gravel crunching behind us. As I looked back into the darkness, I saw the outline of something that resembled a human. I told Alex and his face went pale when he looked. We told the rest of the group quietly, and on 3, we all broke out into a run towards the river. Whatever that thing was, it was extremely fast. When we reached the river, we figured there wasn't enough time to get to the bridge, which was still a quarter of a mile further along the side of the river. So we jumped in and swam across the ice-cold water. This thing got to the river just as we made it up to the bank and into the backyard. Julia and I shined our flashlights and finally got a good look at it. It was a massive, hairy creature that was about 7 feet tall. It had huge, razor-sharp claws like a bear. Its eyes glowed red when the flashlight shined on them. Alex then took a shot at it, and it darted off within one final screech. We all looked at each other scared. Alex then explained everything to our parents. They didn't know what to make of it, and had never heard of anything like it. I'm thankful that nothing happened to us, and also that I had noticed the creature behind us. If I hadn't, one of the others might not have noticed it until it was too late. The next time I stay at that cabin, I'm never going into those woods again. Many of you who love paranormal stuff may have already heard of the word Nahual here in Mexico, and I would guess that also on some other countries in Latin America we call that way people who can shapeshift into animals. Well, here's my story. It was a cold night, I remember, because it was really weird for it to get cold on that side of the country. This was in my parents' house, in a small pueblo, or small town, and back in the day, it was one of the last houses outside of town. Not so many neighbors, but a lot of trees and nature around. The house has a long backyard where we used to have sheep. At one side, a small water stream and trees to the other side. The sheep then started to bleat very loud, something we could call screams. My father then went to give a check on a window in the back side of the house. I still recall his face when he came back quickly, and in a low, urgent voice, he told my mom, "Ve agarra a tu padre y a tus hermanos y diles que vengan ya ahorita. Go ask your father and brothers to come here immediately." They were 4 brothers, my grandfather and my father. When everyone was there, a few minutes later, my father started to tell us what he saw. In the barn, we had 10 sheep. At the moment my father gave a look, all of them were together in just one corner. At the center, there was some kind of big animal. My father described it as a bear, which makes totally no sense, but he said it was big, hairy, and it seemed to be eating one sheep there. This one sheep was screaming really bad. Then, my grandfather told my mom to keep us inside of the house, and to keep me in there also with her. If you go outside now, you may catch a bad air. So he made some kind of prayer, holding his machete. So his prayer, I remember he said the names of my uncles, and also my father's. He then went outside. That's when my grandfather started to yell at the darkness, telling things like, "Vete de aquí, no tienes nada que ver aquí. Deja esta casa. Go away, you have nothing to do here. Leave this house." My father told me that he saw how this thing was in a pose, eating the sheep, which was laying on the ground, still screaming by the way. And when my grandfather yelled at it, this thing seemed to stop and raise its head up towards my family. This thing was only staring at them. Not a single noise, and also no red or shining eyes. Only the shadow looked like it was looking at them. So my father decided to do something at last. He took a big rock, he picked it up from the ground and threw it at this thing. Maybe not the best thing to do in this situation, but I guess this thing was not that strong. Or maybe because it was 6 of us and we all had machetes. But when the rock hit it, this being turned its back and ran away to the forest, running on all 4 legs like an animal would. They then approached the sheep, and my grandpa said how the sheep was on the ground, but it was still alive, but it was completely unskinned. It was horrifying, at least. My grandfather then sacrificed it to stop the suffering. After that night, a family friend told us a story about someone new in town that apparently was a Nahuatl. He told us he spoke to that man, and he told him to leave the town. Indeed, we never happened to live something similar after that. I want to start the story off by saying that I am Navajo. I live in Utah, and growing up, my family never mentioned skinwalkers or witches to me, so I know nothing about them. My grandpa died just before the summer, so my parents sent me to live with my grandma to help her around her ranch. For company, I brought my cat along with me. He was an orange tabby. We had only been there 2 weeks when my cat went missing. I figured that he would come back, but he never did. I called him and looked for him, but nothing. A few days later, I was bringing some hay out behind the barn when something orange caught my eye. It was the remains of my cat. By the looks of it, he was attacked by something, most likely a coyote. They're all around here. However, when I picked it up, I used a pitchfork, and I immediately noticed that there were no bones. It was just a pile of skin and fur, but I also noticed that there were small splotches of what seemed to be red, yellow, and white paint. At first I thought he might have gotten into something, but the way the paint was on his fur, if you told me someone had put it there on purpose, I'm not sure you would be wrong. Even though there wasn't much left to him, I did love him, and I was heartbroken. So I put his remains in a wood box that my grandmother had in the barn and buried him behind a hill. I marked his final resting spot with a nice stone I found, and so that everyone would know he was there, I painted his name and the date in neat white letters and numbers. Only a couple of nights later, I was hearing just outside the hogan and something scratching at the door. My grandmother, however, doesn't have any other cat, and I don't remember seeing any hanging around the ranch. Regardless, I go over and open the door, or at least look out, and each time there was nothing. After a couple of nights of this, I decided, come the morning, to go check on my cat's grave. When I got out to the hill, I saw that the stone was still in place, and nothing looked disturbed. But something told me it wasn't right. I went back to the barn for a shovel, and came back and carefully dug up the grave. I removed the box, and before opening it, said a little prayer. When I took off the lid, you can imagine my surprise when his fur and skin were gone, and instead, the box now contained his bones. At least I thought they were his. I just couldn't believe it. I know for a fact that when I buried that box, it was with fur and skin and not a bone in sight. I wish I could say that this incident was the only strangeness that I experienced while living there, but it's not. As a result, my respect for the Navajo Nation, what the elders say, and for skinwalkers has now grown. I'm not saying I was involved with one, but now I really believe and know why our elders don't talk about them. What I will tell you is, don't seek them out. Stop researching about them. Stop thinking about them. You're basically inviting them into your life, because even with small attention that you give them, they will come looking for you. My friend and I were at a party on the Hopi Reservation in Polaca. It was getting late, and we had a pretty good buzz on. Most of the people we knew had already trickled out, so we decided it was a good time as any to leave. We looked around for the friend who was supposed to give us a ride, because we had all come together. We found him in a back bedroom, drunk and passed out, so we had no choice. We're gonna have to walk. The two of us lived on the other side of the gulch. A good 2 miles. Between were nothing but trees, scrubs, bushes, and some hills. We had barely cleared the houses onto the road passing between the wooded area when we got this funny feeling we were being watched. We decided to leave the road and cut through the trees. It wasn't the easiest walk, but it would cut the distance down some. And even though it was pitch black outside, we knew the way pretty well. We had been a good 20 minutes off the road and heading up towards the hills when that same feeling of being watched came upon us again. We both turned around at the same time, but it was so dark we couldn't see anything. But then, my friend Paul swore he heard some kind of cackling or mumbling. I didn't hear anything, except for maybe the wind in the top of the trees at our back. By that time, none of us was gonna admit it. We were feeling a little scared. Without saying a single word, we picked up the pace, moving along pretty good but not running. And that's when I heard it too. But now, it was more like heavy breathing. Paul then grabbed my arm and gave me a tug forward. We took off running straight up the hill, which wasn't that big, but it was still enough of a slope so I wasn't feeling it in my legs. And on top of that, I was drunk. Think about this for a second. Running up a hill, at night, drunk, complete darkness, and as you're running, you hear footsteps behind you, and heavy breathing. Whatever it was though, stayed with us every step of the way. Right at the top, Paul and I stopped and turned around, expecting the thing to be right on us. But we were standing there, huffing and puffing, and looking at nothing but darkness. A few seconds passed, and then we heard a thin laughter, as if it was coming from down the hill and back from where we started running. We decided to keep moving and put some distance between us. We turned to go down the other side of the hill, and there, standing right in front of us, was this creature. It was standing up on 2 legs, like a circus dog, only much taller, with both paws extended out in front of it. It had this coyote face, and it was grinning at us, all of its teeth exposed, and its tongue sliding from one side to the other. I couldn't believe how skinny it was, as if it hadn't ate in weeks, its rounded stomach sticking out like one of those African kids in the charity ads, and the skin sinking between its ribs. The smell was unbelievably bad, like the smell of an old, wet dog. We both jumped back with a scream, like two little schoolgirls. As we did, the creature dropped down on all fours and ran past us and down the hill back where we had come from. It was yipping and laughing all the way. Paul and I started praying like never before, swearing to Jesus that if he got us home safe, we would never drink again. The laughing, or whatever you want to call it, died down and disappeared. Wasting no time, the two of us made our way down that hill and into the trees that separated us from where we lived. As we walked along, we were trying to convince each other everything was okay. It was only a coyote out searching for a meal. We scared it jumped up at us, and then it ran away. We started feeling better about things overall. We got across the open field and into the trees. We made it all the way through there without anything else happening. However, just as we stepped out towards that first backyard that we needed to cut through to get to the street, we heard this unmistakable chatter, like some little monkey laughing, coming out of the trees just behind us. It was followed by the sound of something moving through the branches and twigs. My friend Paul then yelled out some words that he said that his grandmother had taught him, and just like that, the noise ceased and it got real quiet. He then grabbed my arm again and we ran. We ran as fast as we could through that yard and out to the road. We ran straight for the house where Paul lives with his grandmother. When we got there, we found her awake and sitting in the kitchen with only a small candle for light. She was burning some cedar. When she saw us, she put her finger up to her lips and then pointed to the outside of the house. Her lips were moving, but silently. We stood there still for a minute or two, and then she spoke out loud, saying it was okay. She then said a prayer, and that the skinwalker was now gone. I have no idea how she knew, and I didn't care. Needless to say, I spent the rest of the night there, sleeping where I knew I would be safe. It was late June of 1968. My dad was 12. My grandparents had moved a few months earlier from Tucson, Arizona to Concho, Arizona. Concho was very different, both in landscape and temperature. Sitting at 5,000 feet above sea level, the summer temperatures were around 70 degrees versus the hundreds in summertime Tucson. Resting at the edge of the White Mountains, the land is red, yellow, and brown sandstone cliffs and buttes against a larger ancient basalt flow ridge that lines the north from the Springville volcanic range. Well, Old Concho, as it's referred to now, sits among the high desert with large basalt ridge bordering the east and north. In the valley, a dry riverbed was dotted by large cottonwood trees. The buttes and ridges boasted large twisted cedar trees. Only about 200 people lived in Concho at the time. It's in pretty close proximity to the petrified forest. Therefore, petrified wood was found on the valley floor. There were also numerous ancient Anasazi ruins scattered along the valley. My great-uncle had moved his family to Concho as well. My grandpa had recently finished his engineering degree, and he and my great-uncle were doing highway construction all around the White Mountains. They had both purchased land in the Concho area for pretty cheap. My great-uncle had two sons who were a year older and a year younger than my dad, Tony and Zach. Tony was 13 and Zach was 11. They would spend their days exploring the surrounding landscapes, joined by my dad's American bulldog, Sarge. They had found quite a few ruins, numerous pictographs, and some old abandoned homesteads, most likely from the 19th century. Every morning, they would load up their bags with canteens, bologna sandwiches, and head out into the wilderness to play and explore. My grandparents and great aunt and uncles had only one rule that was for the children, and that was to return by sunset. As my dad recalls, on one summer morning, they ended up hiking towards the edge of the giant basalt ridge to explore. After going for about a mile or so, they came upon an arroyo running adjacent to the ridge. Large black boulders and giant slabs of sandstone peppered the wash. The banks were pretty steep, but they would have to cross it if they want to explore the ridge on the other side. They made their way down slowly. Once in the arroyo, they realized that the opposite bank was too steep to climb, so they started following it west to find a better place to climb up. My dad said as soon as they got into the riverbed, he started getting an unnerving feeling, like they were being watched. He said it was extremely quiet, no birds or cicadas chirping. It was hot as well, no breeze stirred the air. The further they walked down the wash, the more a sense of urgency began to build in his gut. He didn't say anything though, for fear that his cousins would laugh at him. About a half mile or so down the wash, it made a bend around a large volcanic boulder. Suddenly, Sarge began a low growl, hair standing up on his back. This actually startled all three of the kids. Looking around, they didn't see anything, so encouraging the dog, they moved closer to the bend. Sarge stayed rooted to the spot, growling and barking. All three of the boys began to get scared. They agreed that maybe they should just turn around. They noticed that there was a spot where they could climb out of the wash. They hadn't noticed it at first, but it looked almost like a game trail. With adrenaline fueling them, they hauled ass up the side of the embankment towards the ridge, the dog darting after them. The whole time the bad feeling was growing stronger with my dad. They stopped at the top to catch their breath. Sitting against a large boulder, they took some drinks from the canteen and assured each other that Sarge probably smelled a coyote or spotted a rabbit. Here, the game trail was more apparent. It had even worn into some of the volcanic and sandstone that protruded from the ground. They noticed that there were a lot of petroglyphs dotting the black rocks, geometric shapes, animal, human figures. There were so many. Finally, they found a large juniper with a trunk and ate their lunch in shade. Bellies full and excitement replacing fear, they hurried along the trail as it slowly zigged and sagged the side of the basalt ridge, avoiding large areas of rock falls. The pictographs began to change as well along the trails. Lots of spirals and horn-looking men. My dad even said there was one that looked like a UFO. Turning around a bend, the trail disappeared. Only open space of the edge of a cliff. There was nowhere else to go. The cliff dropped off to one side, and a sheer cliff going up about 50 feet on the other side. My dad, he was disappointed, but also a little relieved, as the sun was getting further west, and they were pretty far from Concho now. They could see the town in the distance, as well as the holy mountain and mesas that dotted the distant Navajo res. Even though they were disappointed, they decided that it was worth looking at the view. They started making their way down the trail when they spotted an opening in the cliffside, a side canyon. They hadn't noticed it on the way up. It was behind a large twisted cedar. The tree's shadow had hidden it. It looked almost like there was another trail going into the divide. The opening was about 4 feet wide. Looking at it, that unnerving feeling returned to my dad. His stomach dropped and he felt like it was twisting in knots. The hair on the back neck stood up. Tony suggested that they should detour and check it out. My dad protested, saying that they needed to get back. Zach stayed silent. He looked as scared as my dad felt. Tony laughed when looking at them and called them both sissies. He said if they didn't want to go, it was fine, that they could wait there for him and be babies if they wanted. That's when Sarge ran down the trail and was out of sight. My dad whistled for him, but he didn't return. Zach decided he would follow Tony, so my dad stayed behind while they entered the narrow black-walled canyon. When they moved out of my dad's field of vision, the wind picked up, blowing through the canyon and trees, making a creepy sound. It was quiet except the wind, and my dad thought he heard faint voices on the air. He shivered, the ominous feeling growing stronger. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and still, Tony and Zach had not returned. A large cloud had covered the sun, and drops of rain began to fall. My dad moved under the cedar to get out of the light rain that began to fall. He sat on a rock and began to shiver. Suddenly, something grabbed his shoulder. He jumped about 3 feet and screamed. Then he heard laughing. It was Tony and Zach. They looked extremely excited. "Luke, you'll never believe what we found," they said. "We found some Indian steps and they lead to a cave." They begged my dad to come see. It wasn't far, only about 10 minutes into the canyon. My dad ended up following them, knowing they weren't going to agree to go home until they showed them. Plus, he felt a little braver and more intrigued now. Sure enough, around a bend and about 20 yards into the canyon was more wide, about 20 to 30 feet across, and there were indeed foot and handholds carved into the rock wall. My dad had seen steps like them before, when his parents had taken him to Chaco Canyon National Park. They were smaller than the ones in Chaco and only went up about 20 feet to the darkened mouth of a small cave. He shivered from excitement or fear, he wasn't sure. From the bottom of the canyon, there was no way of telling how large the cave was. They dropped their packs and decided to use the foot and handholds to climb up to the cave against my dad's better judgment. The rain had stopped, but they slowly and carefully made their way because the rock had become slick. It took about 10 minutes to ascend. My dad called for Sarge from the top again, and the dog still hadn't returned. The cave was much larger and deeper than they expected, and the entrance was decorated with hundreds of petroglyphs. The light didn't penetrate very far in, but they could see light in the distance from an opening in the roof. So they entered. Light adjusting to the dark, they started to notice that the ground was covered with objects. What looked like rocks and debris now revealed itself to be pots, beautiful, painted pots of all shapes and sizes, black on white, painted with geometric patterns, and animals, red pots and even some yellow ones, large pots holding dried corn and crusty squash and beans. There were also pots filled with arrowheads and beads. They even found some instruments like drums and flutes. They didn't touch anything and kept walking deeper into the cave. They looked around in shock and in awe. They had just discovered something big, something very big. They moved now towards the second bit of light streaming in from a crack in the roof. The cave was littered with all sorts of artifacts, stone axes, pots of all shapes, colors, and sizes. As they passed under the crack, they noticed now that there were objects in alcoves in the wall. My dad moved closer to one, and his blood froze. He was looking at a human body, It was decayed skin and hair clinging to patches and its mouth open in what looked like a silent scream. He took a leap back. Tony and Zach also froze. The walls were lined with alcoves filled with dressed bodies, lining the walls as far as they could see into the darkness. Suddenly, an ominous and horrendous screech broke the silence of the cave. All three boys jumped, and my dad, looking in the direction from where the sound came, saw two red and glowing eyes. He froze, locked in place by those glowing red eyes. Suddenly, the cave was washed over with the stench of decay and death. The eyes began to move towards the boys. Slowly, another hideous growl, screech, jolted them from being petrified in place. The eyes were moving fast now, right towards them, and they heard what sounded like running footsteps. They turned and tore out of the cave as fast as they could. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them in a blind panic. The entrance to the cave was maybe 30 yards away. My dad looked back against his better judgment and saw a man on all fours, or a giant coyote. He can't be sure. He pushed himself faster, screaming for the others to also run faster. They reached the edge of the cave, having to turn around to scrabble back down the foot and handholds. Zach got there first and began descending as fast as he could. Tony was next. His face turned into a wash of horror as he went down. My dad's heart was hammering into his brain by now. He turned and saw the eyes only about 20 feet from him. The stench of decay was overpowering. It made his stomach turn. As fast as he could, he placed his feet in the first set of footholds and started clambering down the rock face. He could hear the creature's breath now, and even feel it. He refused to look up as he was going down, trying to concentrate on the hand and footholds. He heard Tony scream from below him, and looked to see Tony lose his hold and slip about 5 feet from the bottom. He landed on his side and began to scream with pain. My dad slowed himself a bit, still not daring to look back up. After what seemed like an eternity, he leaped from the cliffside down the last 2 feet. Zach was helping Tony to his feet, and Tony was frozen looking at the cave and ancient staircase. All the color gone from his face. My dad was in full panic, and not looking, grabbed Tony and helped Zach drag him away. They flew down the little canyon. Finally, before they passed the turn, my dad looked back to see the red eyes watching them from the darkness. Another screech rang from the cave, and at that moment, Sarge in a full run came from around the bend, growling and barking. He ran to the foot and handhold staircase and bellowed up that cave, the hair on his back standing straight up, snarling and growling. The sounds of the dog filled the canyon. As my dad turned the corner, he saw those red eyes retreat back into the cave. They emerged from the small canyon and stopped briefly to catch their breath. The sounds of Sarge barking and growling echoing down the canyon. Tony at this point was now crying, his face washed with pain. His arm, he said. He thinks he broke it. Zach was silent. My dad was then asking Tony if he could make it home. Tony responded he sure the hell wasn't staying anywhere near whatever that was. Suddenly, a shrill cry came from the canyon. It was a dog, in pain. "Sarge," my dad cried, but Tony and Zach had started running down the trail. My dad screamed again, tears coming from his eyes. There was no response. It was quiet. My dad thinks he hears something. He looks up to the canyon entrance. It sounds like drums. My dad sits there confused. Drums? What the hell? Is he losing his mind? The drums are getting loud. Is this in his mind? Where is Sarge? He can't leave him. My dad sees Zach tearing back up the trail. "Luke, we have to go. The drums are louder now." and he can hear faint chanting. Zach grabs my dad and jerks him to his feet. "Don't you hear that?" he screams and shakes my dad. "We have to run, now!" My dad is woken from his grief as fear washes over him again. He runs down the trail with Zach. Tony is waiting at the edge of the arroyo, waiting for them. The wash is now running, about 6 inches deep. They notice for the first time that a large thunderhead has developed to the south. A huge, large black storm dominating the southern horizon, lightning flashing in the distance. A new source of danger crosses my dad's mind. He tells Tony and Zach they need to cross the arroyo as fast as possible. If it floods, they will be stuck on the side with the basalt ridge, with whatever that thing was. They make their way down carefully and slowly. Tony is having a hard time because of his injured arm. They now start hearing thunder rolling across the air, and the wind has increased. My dad is keeping a close eye on the creek, which has only risen a couple of more inches. They make all the way down and across the creek. The place where they crossed is only 30 yards or so ahead, so they scrabble their way towards it. The water starts rising now at an alarming rate. They start going as fast as their legs will carry them. They're exhausted, but keep pushing on. Suddenly, my dad, who is in the rear, starts to hear loud splashing coming from behind him. His heart drops. It followed them. It's getting closer. He closes his eyes, bracing for impact. That's when he feels something lick the back of his swinging hand. He turns, bracing for impact, and sees Sarge. Joy fills my dad. He bends down and gives Sarge a quick hug as the dog runs past, and the dog bounds after Tony and Zach as they climb out of the arroyo. My dad runs and begins to climb. When he's almost to the top, he hears crashing and loud snapping coming from the arroyo. Making it to the top, he sees a wave of brown debris filled water crash through the wash. He falls to his butt and watches as the flash flood fills the little canyon. Tony and Zach are lying on the ground, gasping for air. My dad tries to catch his breath. He feels dizzy. He feels tears welling up, and Sarge comes and licks his face. My dad sees that Sarge is covered with blood. He looks over the dog and finds several slash wounds on his back. His ear is also torn. They don't look too deep, but he can't be sure. Zach is the first to speak. He is asking what it was, but no one responds. Tony's arm is beginning to swell pretty badly, and it's only a few hours till dusk. They're all thirsty and realize in their panic they left their packs in the small canyon, along with their canteens. They are no longer in a hurry. They are exhausted. They drink some rainwater that has pooled in one of the large sandstone boulders. They figure whatever that thing was, it's not going to be getting across the arroyo for a few hours. So they slowly make their way back to Concho as the thunderhead to the south continues to fill the landscape. The three boys and Sarge make it home around 8. The sun has set, and my grandparents and great uncle and aunt are worry sick. They are relieved and angry until they see the condition of the trio and the dog. The boys tell them about their horrendous tale, and Tony's parents rush Tony to the nearest doctor. That night, my dad sleeps with Sarge at the end of his bed. Despite him being extremely exhausted, he is plagued with nightmares. One that he speaks about all the time is especially terrifying, where he sees the red eyes looking in through his window. When he wakes up though, in the morning, his curtains are closed. The rain continued for 2 or 3 days. The boys don't leave their homes, still terrified of what happened. My grandpa and great uncle are convinced what the boys encountered was a mountain lion, but they are intrigued by the story of the cave they found. A few days later, when the weather is clear, they tell the boys they want to see the cave. They make the journey faster this time, using my great uncle's Jeep. My grandpa and great uncle also bring along a couple of shotguns and rifles in case this lion is still in the cave. The boys show them the arroyo, which has been filled with new boulders and broken trees from the flooding. They find the trail and start making their way up. My grandpa on the front and great uncle taking the rear. They find the boys' packs caught in a cedar bush. They have been shredded. My grandpa figures they must have been caught by another flood and they ended up in the trees. They finally make it to the little hidden canyon, which has been blocked by a juniper that washed down during the rain. My grandpa and great uncle get the log out of the way and they go to the canyon to the Indian staircase. When they look up though, they can make out the darkness of the cave. The water washed away all signs of the boys' previous passage. My grandpa figures maybe at this time of day, the cave is more illuminated, so he and my great uncle climb up the foot and handholds to the top. The boys wait at the bottom, having no desire to go back up there again. It's only my dad and Zach. Tony with his broken arm stayed home. My grandpa calls down for them to climb up. They do as they are told and climb up. When my dad reaches the top, he is stunned. The cave is gone. It's only a 20-foot rock alcove next to a black basalt cliff covered with petroglyphs. He's confused, looks around. He goes over to the wall looking for cracks and sees nothing. My grandpa and great uncle end up questioning the boys. Were they making up stories? No, they weren't. Something attacked Sarge, and the boys hadn't made up being that scared. The dads aren't mad. It's a neat area. Maybe some other weekend they will look for the cave again. My dad and Zach know that this is where the cave was. There's no doubt in their minds. They found their packs and even passed by the UFO petroglyph, but they can't convince the adults, so they make their way to the Jeep that is parked on the far bank of the arroyo. As they load up, sun sinking low in the western sky. My dad looks back at the black basalt ridge, wondering if maybe it was all just a dream, but something in the shadow of a cliff catches his eye. He squints against the sun and sees two red shining eyes looking back at him. His blood goes cold. He turns around as the Jeep pulls away. My grandparents only stayed in Concho for another few months. As soon as my grandpa finished the highway project, he got a job offer in the U.S. Virgin Islands. My dad said after that encounter, he had nightmares every night and would swear that at night he would see the red eyes outside of the house until they finally moved from Concho. After he moved, he never had a nightmare about the eyes again. But it wasn't his last encounter with the red-eyed creature. He would see it again when he became an adult. But that is a story for another time.